My name is
Jenny.
David.
Lila.
Laurel.
Jen.
Lisa.
Dino.
Ari.
Kyle.
I was a
Jehovah's Witness.
Jehovah's Witness.
FLDS.
In the Amish church.
The chosen people.
I was a Scientologist.
I grew up a Mooney, a member of the Unification Church.
2x2.
And I am
Shunned.
shunned.
Sean.
Shunned.
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 Shunned. Shunned.
Shunned.
Just a quick note before we get started. If you stick around to the end of this episode, there's actually a song that was produced using a quote of mine from the podcast, something that I say fairly often, by David Sondheim. Some of you may know David or remember him from episodes 6, 7, 8, and 9, all the way back at the beginning of Shunned podcast. He's a musician himself, and he produced a song using that quote, and it's actually very apropos for this story. So we decided to include it at the end, and I hope you enjoy. So I'll let you go ahead, hear Alex's story, and then at the end, there will be the song from David Sondheim. And if you want more information about his music or to follow him at all, we'll have links in the description, both here on YouTube and on all podcast platforms. Without further ado, let's go meet Alex.
Hello, my name is Alex. I'm 46 years old. I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I am shunned.
Okay, Alex, so how'd you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place?
I was born in, up to third generation on both sides, so a very rich spiritual heritage.
Ah, yes. Okay. Do you have an origin story? Do you know, was there any family lore around how this developed 3 generations ago?
A little bit. On my dad's side, he was raised in it. His parents were both joined in the 1940s, right after World War II, right before he was born. So he was raised his entire life. It might actually be technically 4th generation because my great-grandmother on that side was also in the religion, but I think she came in around the same time as my grandparents did. I'm not quite sure. I think they were reached in the door-to-door work, but I'm not quite sure exactly how that came about. I do know that my grandmother lost a child who was only a few days old before my dad was born. I don't know if that played a part in what attracted them to the message or not, but my grandfather had just gotten back from World War II. They had just lost a young child, so I'm sure that they were pretty vulnerable at that point.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, you've got 2 very large vulnerabilities there, and I'm sure looking for some stability or some hope for the future or whatever the case may have been. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, on my mom's side, I know a little bit more about that. My grandmother was approached in the door-to-door ministry in the early 1950s. My mom was born right in 1950, and she has told me before that she does vaguely remember having a Christmas tree when she was about 3. It's very, very vague. At 3 years old, you don't really remember much. She just knows that they did have one. But after that, they stopped celebrating all the holidays. My grandfather on that side wasn't really involved. I don't know if he was very much opposed or just not really interested. He was a truck driver. He was gone for periods of time, and but my grandmother and all 5 of their kids went to the Kingdom Hall, were all very involved. My dad actually studied with my grandfather while he was dating my mom, and I think my grandfather was baptized around the time that my parents were married.
Wow, that's how many future husbands study with their father-in-law? That's
Yeah, I don't know. I'd say it may have been right after they were married that he was baptized, but I know it was right around there. But I do know my dad told me that he studied with him.
That's a unique situation.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
So, just you threw out the term earlier, your quote, rich spiritual heritage. Did you, having these generations before you, did that mean something to you, growing up in it? Was it ever talked about in those terms? Did you feel any pressure because of it?
We didn't. My family was never one to just try and act like they were better than anybody, but it was talked about. It was a point of pride. My great grandmother I remember going to meetings with her. She was in her 80s by the time I was born. She had some health issues, so she wasn't really active, like going door to door and stuff like that. But she was pretty cool. She was really into it, and I remember always loved spending time with her. She was born in 1898, so she would have been part of that generation that wouldn't pass away type of thing, even though she never claimed to be one of the anointed. But it was cool talking to her. Like she remembered when the Titanic sank because she was 14, and she remembers reading it in the paper, and she remembers World War One. Her husband died in the late 1920s after an accident in a quarry mine where he was working. She raised all three of her children by herself. She never remarried. Very, very tough lady. She, her oldest daughter was not a witness, but the middle child, my great uncle, he was, and of course, my grandmother, her youngest, she was witness. So I think that they kind of all came in around the same time, and her oldest daughter was out and married and had her own family by then.
So sounds like you really got to talk to some of these old timers too.
Yeah,
You got a perspective. I mean, my goodness, we're talking Titanics and World War One and
yeah,
things, 1800s. So we're talking some people here who had some perspective over their lifespan that they could share with you, I'm sure.
yeah. And I'm sure raising three kids by herself in through the Great Depression wasn't easy, and maybe I'm sure at some point, hearing the message and things like that would appeal to someone who she had a rough life. She had it hard. She made the best of it. She was a strong lady, very impressive lady. But I'm sure that all that, you start hearing this message, and this is back when they were doing witnessing with, wearing the sandwich boards and had the speakers on cars driving around. My dad is a young kid, and his parents, and I think my great grandmother too, went to like one of the big conventions in Brooklyn at, the old Dodger Stadium or Yankee Stadium,
Yankee
one of the two. They
Stadium,
were
yeah.
really big. Yeah. And, all that kind of stuff. So you hear these stories growing up. My um, I know that my dad's parents were really involved with starting a lot of congregations throughout the area where they lived, and just kind of building things up. So it was a big point of pride.
Can I ask what area that was of the United States, or?
It was southern Wisconsin.
Huh, okay, interesting. It's interesting to hear, where families come from and how they, affect an area at times as they're, helping build the congregations up and things like that. It's just
Yeah,
interesting.
they were never like full time in the ministry work. My grandfather always worked. I don't think I'm not sure, but I think even like when the elder arrangement started, I don't think he was ever an elder or anything like that. But they were active, and it was a big deal with them.
So, growing up with all of this around you, how did that influence the worldview that you had as a little kid growing up around all of this? Did it did it just make you feel special, or how did it make you feel growing up that way?
Yeah, definitely felt special. My family was never one to really talk bad about other people in the world, but they were you were special. You were one of God's chosen people, So, there was a lot of talk about the responsibility um, to reach as many people as you can, and to work hard in it and be really focused. As far as a general worldview, we were right, they were wrong, but they were to be kind of pitied.
Mm,
You know, they weren't unless you were actively opposed, you weren't really the enemy, but you still didn't associate with them or anything like that. But you just kind of felt bad for them because you were the best because you had the truth. I hate calling it that now, but it's we were the best ones. We were God's chosen people, and we took that very, very seriously. Uh, I felt sorry for a lot of people because they would die if they didn't know or chose to follow Satan. But the people of the Kingdom Hall were like people who would ever actually be friends. You couldn't really have no one else knew God, so they could never be your friend because they didn't know what true love was and friendship and fellowship and all that stuff. That was kind of the
And it,
whole big picture.
yeah, isn't it interesting to, you know, pity. No one wants to be pitied, right? No one, it
Mhm.
doesn't feel good. There's an element of like, oh, look at those people over there, right? They don't have
Yeah,
what we have. And I think that, that's a difficult thing for a lot of folks, even after they leave Jehovah's Witnesses, is just like almost wondering, well, who are these people here on the outside? You and I, we talked a little bit in the bonus Patreon interview, and just about how you had to make yourself vulnerable in some ways and get to know some different people and things like that. And it's just it is interesting. We're really not all that different as human beings. We
yeah,
all get nervous about things. We're all scared to do something for the first time, for the most part. But it really made us feel like we were somehow different than other people, didn't it? Like they don't quite love like we do. They don't quite get scared like we do, or whatever. Like we're all like we were somehow so vastly like a different species almost in some
yeah,
way, which is so unfair.
yeah. We were very active. You did not miss a meeting. You were out there, almost every Saturday, and we did that because we had this view that you had to do these things to prove your love for Jehovah, and everything was very black or white.
Mhm.
You know, you everything's black or white, right or wrong, and
Good or
we were
evil.
right. We were right. They were wrong. We were good. They were bad, and it made you see other people very one dimensionally.
Mhm. Yeah, there's no shades of gray in there, and there's no real understanding. It's just we're good, they're bad, and what we wouldn't want to associate with, bad association spoils useful habits, right?
Yes,
First
yes, yes.
Corinthians 15:33. Still remember
Oh yeah, I do too.
it. Sorry for triggering everyone in the
No, that's
audience.
okay.
But that's yeah, you just saw them a certain way, and it really does influence the way you see other people, almost as a danger.
It does.
Um, so y- did you well, let's talk about different areas of life and kind of how some of this manifested. So let's talk a little bit about life at home growing up. What was I don't know, what was life like? Were you all the family? I mean, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but were you at all the meetings? You were out in the service every Saturday? Were you all like the very regular people? Did you study a lot at home? Things like that? Was it a big deal for you guys?
It was very important to my family. Of course, we you did not miss a meeting unless you were very, very, very ill. And I mean, I'd like to say we didn't miss me, and I'm sure we would miss it one occasionally if I was really sick. Like, I was little, I had chicken pox. I'm sure I didn't go, but um, it's very, very important to my family. It was always just assumed. I never questioned it as a kid. You never questioned the doctrine, never questioned the activities or anything. That was just life. I'm an only child. I lived, it was just me and my parents. Things were pretty, to me, that was my normal. We were happy. I did have a sister who was born premature about 2 years before I was born and passed away after about a day. So I think that event, along with the hope of a resurrection, was a really big deal for my parents. It was something I grew up. I've known all my life. We didn't make a big deal about it. There wasn't like crying and all that stuff that I knew. But my parents always kind of, I was always told, you have a sister. She's just not here. So it also made the resurrection hope really important to me because I kind of grew up knowing that I just knew that after the Great Tribulation, I would get to meet my sister. So I didn't even question it. It didn't even seem like a weird thing to think about because, oh, during the resurrection, your sister's going to come back. So, and my parents really hung on to that a lot. I'm sure that was a huge, huge thing for them. As a parent myself now, I can't imagine what that's like. I never want to know. And, but I know that was really, really important to them. But home life was good, especially when I was really young. My mom was able to stay home with me uh, while my dad worked. So, and we were very, very close. We have a lot of the same interests. She likes music, art, and reading, and really kind of instilled that in me. Uh, I didn't have a lot of friends when I was a kid. There were other kids in the congregation, but I didn't really click with any of them. My parents were kind of bad. We were going to a congregation. We didn't live in their territory because they had
Ooh.
lived. They had went to this congregation, and then about a couple years before I was born, they moved, and we were kind of right on the edge. But they wanted to stay with the congregation they knew, so we weren't actually in their territory. And I didn't realize till later that's kind of a bad thing. You're not supposed to do that. But
We
as
were
I
the
grow up,
same, and I know that it's frowned upon, and you're like
yeah,
try to make you feel guilty for doing so.
yeah,
It's so ridiculous.
we were like 2 miles
Yeah.
across the border of the territory. So it's right on the edge. So the Kingdom Hall was still only 20 minutes away, um, but the kids in the congregation, I just didn't really click with them. We did get together for like, little play dates and things like that. But I was pretty introverted as a kid. I played outside a lot by myself, occasionally with a couple of the neighborhood kids, but I didn't really get to know most of them very well. We had across the street was kind of like a little like almost like a little nature preserve area. It went back to there was a field that went back to some marshland to the river, and there were a lot of wood trees through parts of it and trails. So I spent my time outside climbing trees and just playing outside. I had a sandbox when I was really little. That was my favorite toy in the world. There was a couple kids who lived next door that my mom babysat. The boy was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years younger than me. He was probably my best friend at a really young age. It was really the only other kid I talked to a lot because he was at my house so often. And then I loved going over to their house. They lived right next door. My parents let me go over there to play with him. But that was great because he had He-Man and Thundercats and GI Joes and little army men and stuff like that. So we got to play with that. I got to play with that stuff there, and I love that stuff. But as far as friends in the congregation, they were all really the adults, my parents' friends. They were really kind to me. I really liked talking to the older people. I always kind of felt like I was more grown up than other kids at the Kingdom Hall because I was always, kind of praised. Oh, you're so mature. You'll sit still and you will pay attention. Up to any point that a 5 or 6 year old can pay attention. Um, I love going out in field service with them because I didn't realize at the time, but I was I was their icebreaker because I would go up and I'd had like a little like one sentence to say and would hand people tracts and they'd use that. I realize now they use that just to get people to open the door because kids aren't going to refuse a cute little kid in a suit.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
But
We were being used for that. Absolutely.
absolutely. Another thing I really liked is as a little kid, there was in our hall there was a sister who used to play all the songs on piano. We didn't have recordings. So I really, I loved that. That was cool. I loved talking with her, and we did that until she got too old to play, and then we started doing the recordings right before we moved out of that congregation, and I hated it. Hated the recordings. I loved hearing her play the piano. Um, I really wanted to give talks and be that little grown up that they want you to be. I was unbaptized, but I became an unbaptized publisher and joined the theocratic ministry school when I was about 6 or 7. And I like the idea of giving talks because I got a lot of praise for that, especially at such a young age. It scared the crap out of me. I was
Yeah, I was gonna say
horribly
a little
nervous.
introvert giving talks, that's
It
a
was
scary
horrifying.
thing.
I get up there and then I had a little stool for the podium. They lower it way down, and I'd be kind of tucked down, reading my notes and shaking and about to puke. But everybody was giving you so much praise because you're 6, either 6 or 7. You're up here giving a talk. We had 2 theocratic ministry schools in our congregation, so I was always in the smaller school that was downstairs. But I don't think I ever gave a talk in the main auditorium at that age. But I still felt it made me feel so good. Everything, oh, you're so great. You're so, you're so spiritual. Jehovah's going to support you and you're doing such great things. I wasn't the kid who was running around screaming. And I remember one time getting dragged to the bathroom by my mom. I don't know what I was doing, but I got dragged through the Kingdom Hall and got my butt beat. But I wasn't the kid that was happening to all the time. I only remember it happening once.
So this sounds like it was really kind of working for you at a young age. There was a lot of praise, and you kind of felt like you belonged, at least with the older folks,
Yeah,
uh, and
and
such.
that praise I really latched on to, especially because I didn't really have a lot of people in my life. I mean, I had my parents and my grandparents, but I really, really want. I think anybody wants praise, and
Of course, we want to belong, right? And
yeah.
praise is kind of a sign that you belong here.
Mhm. So yeah, I was kind of latched onto the idea that I'm more mature than the other kids that I was getting praise for. So that was a big deal to me.
Well, yeah, yeah. There is also that it's not just praise, but it does kind of become a comparison. I'm just thinking about it. I think on some level, I felt a certain way too with regards to some of that because I was getting a lot of praise, and it just makes you feel like, if nothing else, it makes you feel like you're doing the right thing. Other
Mhm.
people may not be, but you are. And,
Yeah,
it's very encouraging for you to go down that path then, right?
yeah, that was a real big deal to me. And I kind of carried that over as I got older. It manifested myself in perfectionism and always wanting to worry about getting obsessed with people's perception of me than
Sure.
what's really underneath the surface. But
Well, yeah, it's your appearance as one of Jehovah's Witnesses is everything. It's a very appearance focused driven thing. It's really not about who you are. It's about how you appear to the congregation and how many
exactly,
hours you're putting in or how many times you're giving talks or raising hands or moving up the ladder. It's not about. Nobody ever asks, do you really love Jehovah? Do you have a real relationship with him? Do you study? How do you feel about all this? A lot of
yeah.
people are just doing the next thing that they think is the right thing to do because
Mm.
that's the only choice they have.
Yeah, I love filling out my field service time report that we used to turn in when I was a kid.
Yep.
It's just I love putting those numbers on there, and I didn't see other kids doing that, so I internalized a lot of that as this is what makes me good because look how I look compared to everybody else.
It's a
I
little
didn't think about it
scoreboard.
that way at the time, but
Yeah. Yeah, it makes you feel special, right? You got a
it
little
does.
magazine route, and you're out there passing out magazines to folks, and in the territory, you feel, um, for some people hated every second of it, but for others, it made you feel special because and I was that way too. I understand.
Yeah, I always had the collection of the older magazines in my bag to hand out because back then we charged for magazines.
Yep,
I don't know how many of your listeners remember that, but there used to be a price.
a quarter each, right?
Yeah, something like that. It was a quarter. Yeah, I think it was a quarter, and the books were like $1 or something like
Yep.
that. But I always carried. We could give away the older magazines, so I always in my bag I always had the old ones for people like when they would, and I realized now it was kind of scripted. So when they would turn down the adult I was with, they didn't want to pay for it, and I'll say, "Well, here you can take this," and and they would just take it because I'm a little kid in a suit and tie, handing in something. So I realize now that a lot of times, not saying that the people I'm with weren't trying to be good and genuine, but it was manipulative. They were
Oh,
using it was being
100%.
used.
I don't think they know they're being manipulative, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's just the nature of the
on
beast, so to speak.
yeah, on an individual level, I'm sure there were a lot of people that were fairly genuine about it and didn't think about, but they're trained and taught to manipulate people.
Sure. We had the reasoning book. It was the
Yeah,
book of how to manipulate conversations
that's
and to push past consent.
mhm. I remember when that book came out,
Yeah.
and that was that little brown book, and you always had that with you, and we would talk about it in like a little bit. Sometimes in the field service meeting before we went out, we'd cover a point. We'd talk about that book all the time. People would talk about it in field service. Sometimes you'd always have somebody who was overly zealous in the field service group that would want to share a point from the reasoning book. Or you talk to people. I forgot about this till you mentioned it, but you'd go up and people, we get turned away at the door, and you'd come back and the person with, okay, so here's in the reason book how we could have handled that.
Here is how we could have manipulated the householder
Exactly.
and pushed past their lack of consent so that they would hopefully say yes to something that they wanted to say no to.
Exactly. Exactly. Meanwhile, this guy's just trying to mow his lawn on a Saturday morning.
Yes. Yes. I had no idea he was that we were going to be out there, and we saw him with his mower, so he couldn't. He
You can't
had to
leave.
talk to us.
Oh yeah, you love those people because you can corner and assault those people.
Yeah, captive audience. Yes,
Hmm.
that's funny. So
As far
you,
as like personal study and family study and things like that, we always study the Watchtower and would like highlight. And my parents, because I was really young, would say, "Okay, on this paragraph, you're going to raise your hand to comment on this one." They give me like 2 or 3 paragraphs that I would know I would have to comment on to try and help me with that. As for separate family study, we didn't do a lot of that, a few times, but we studied the Watchtower most weeks when I was young.
so then you guys were you did do your little studies and things. I mean, it sounds like really you all were just a very, I don't know, kind of like basic JW family. Like you were just doing the basics, right? You were doing the things that were asked.
Hmm.
You were kind of like following the rules as far as like association to some degree, and just being at the meetings, hanging out like in the center of the congregation, as they would say, right? Like being
Yeah,
you weren't at the on the fringes or anything.
no, we weren't on the edge. We weren't like the all-star family. Like my mom didn't pioneer. She may have auxiliary pioneered a few times. I don't really know. Um, but we weren't that family. My dad was an elder before I was born, and he stepped down after I was born because he took on some more responsibilities at work. I think he mostly did that so my mom could be able to stay home with me at a young age. When I was very young, he traveled a lot for work. Um, every couple months he'd be gone for a few days. Uh, Nothing really, really big. He was home most of the time, but he stepped down so he could spend more time being able to provide for his family. And my dad became pretty fiscally responsible, which is good. He started saving money and things like that so he could retire and all that stuff, which a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses don't do. I don't know if they got any kickback from that. I have no idea. I was too little. Uh, then when I got a little bit older, he changed jobs at the same company so he wouldn't be traveling anymore because he wanted to be home more. But yeah, my mom didn't work until I was in school full time. So
Sounds
they
like your
were,
parents really put a lot of thought into how they were going to go about some of this. They weren't quite as just, throw caution to the wind, pioneer and be an elder and forget the family or forget retirement. It sounds like they were kind of conscientious in the way that they went about some of these things.
they were a little bit older when I was born too. I don't know if that played anything into it. My dad was 32, my mom was 28 when I was born. So they weren't like, 17 or 18. They had a little bit of life experience. So I'm sure that played some into it. Um, but yeah, there are a lot of things that you can tell were deliberate in a good way, thoughtful, and instead of just winging it and flying by the seat of their pants. I'm sure there was some of that too that I just didn't see as a kid. But my parents really tried to be involved with me and make me feel loved and and appreciated. It was a good childhood as when I was very young.
Can I ask what kind of things, you've talked a lot about uh, different things you did congregationally, I guess, together, but were there things that you all enjoyed doing just as a family that had nothing to do with Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah, we camped a lot. Camping and fishing are my dad's big things. We camped a lot, even when I was very, very young. There's pictures of me at like, I don't know, like 6 months old in a camper. And that was usually what we did for vacation. We were with my dad's parents a lot. We saw them almost every week or so. They're a big part of my life growing up, and I would stay with them a lot. They lived about 40 minutes away. We went to, of course, we went to the meetings regularly, and even when I was staying with them, we went to meetings in their congregation. So I got to know a lot of people in their congregation. I made a really, really good friend. My only, probably at a younger age, probably my only real good friend in their congregation. He used to go camping with us. We go fishing together. We spent a lot of time. Whenever I was up there, we just clicked. We have a lot of the same interests. He was absolutely my best friend as a kid. Even though we didn't see each other a ton. We didn't see each other weekly, but probably at least once a month we would get together. There's a little lake up in northern Wisconsin my family always camps at, and he went with us quite a bit, sometimes with my parents, sometimes with just me and my grandparents. He'd come over to my grandparents' house. There's a little campground not too far from their house. We went camping there. So him and I were, when we got to be together, we were very, very, very close. Definitely one of my best friends. Probably the only person in the congregation as a kid that I ever clicked with. My only real JW friend. My parents also really hard to make me not feel left out, especially as I got toward in school age. They'd have a party a couple times a year with decorations, games, cake, the typical what would be happen at a birthday party. We'd invite all the kids from the Kingdom Hall, and once I got into school, after I was allowed to invite one kid from school to try and make me feel included. They didn't usually come, but I do remember one time one kid came. I was probably in third grade, and there was all kinds of questions. They kept asking, "What kind of presents should they bring? What should they bring?" And they couldn't understand it wasn't a birthday party, and I didn't understand what they were talking about. Like, no, just come. Um, my parents also tried to let me do a lot of activities as a kid, and within reason. I really wanted to play Little League, and I really wanted to join the Cub Scouts because some kids were in school, and I love camping and being outside. So that was right up my alley. Of course, I was not allowed to do any of those things. But local parks and rec in our town had classes in the summer for lots of different things, and I did several of those. I was never allowed to do any of the team sports or anything like that, but we did do tennis lessons for a couple times and horseback riding, which I really got into. That was probably fifth or sixth grade. I did that.
And that's because those are solo pursuits where you're not
Mhm.
around too many worldly kids.
Yeah, so I did tennis lessons. My parents both like playing tennis, so I would play tennis with my parents. Um, and then the horseback riding was something that really got to be my thing. Um, I didn't spend a lot of time there. They had something at the stable where I would ride called Barn Crew, which kids could earn free riding time by helping out around the barn, cleaning out stables, brushing horses. Eventually, I got to where I was helping teach some of the classes. That usually the instructor would be in the center of the ring, and they'd need people like in the corners for the younger class to help just keep an eye, make sure people are going around the ring right and doing it. I really enjoyed that. I did make some friends there. I didn't, never saw them outside of there, but I really, really enjoyed that. My parents actually let me go and do a couple of the riding shows, and got to compete a little bit with that. So I really love that.
Can I ask, you mentioned that you made some friends there. Did you feel like you clicked with I know you talked about how you didn't feel like you clicked with a lot of kids at the Kingdom Hall. Did you feel an attraction to, or did you click with kids outside the Kingdom Hall that maybe you just weren't allowed to, pursue further?
Yeah, I got along with those kids there because we were all really interested in horses, so we
Okay.
had a mutual interest. Um, I I had one friend starting in first grade who moved down into a new house, moved into my class, who lived down the street from me. Um, he was never associated with the witnesses. His name's Jeff. I don't care. We were going through school. He was he was probably my only real friend in school. Um, we so we were allowed to, play at each other's houses and stuff like that. It's funny. I remember we did invite him to come to the memorial one time, and he came to a couple meetings with us. And my so he did that, which was not a big deal. And that was kind of my way to kind of justify it, to having a worldly friend. So, um, but it's funny. His mom then invited me to come to church with them one Sunday. They were Lutheran.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was, you thought the bomb would have gone off. Yo, you can't go to their church. You can't do this. You can't set foot inside a church. I was like, okay. I mean, I didn't think it was a big deal.
Well, yeah, he
I
came
was
to
actually, I was,
yours.
I was actually
Why
kind of
is it such a big
curious.
deal?
Well, I was actually kind of curious
Sure.
because well, I wonder what they do. What do they do there? I mean, you hear stuff growing up in the organization about church. All you hear about is the Catholics and how horrible they are and all the stuff they do. But I didn't know anything about Lutherans, so I was just kind of curious. I mean, they weren't very, very, very religious, but they invited me. And my parents, that put their foot down on that one. That was a no go.
I think
But
it is funny how witnesses, that they want you to come do their stuff, but they
Mhm.
will never come do yours.
Yeah,
It's
no,
not
we
reciprocal.
invite him to the meetings. He couldn't come to the meetings with us. That's great.
Mhm.
But no, they said they were so offended that she would even ask.
Yeah.
And
It's
oh man.
I have to say, I have to point out, and you may not have meant it this way, but uh, when I asked about if you got along with the kids or clicked with the kids that were outside of the Kingdom Hall, you were like, yeah, we had something in common. And
Mhm.
because you were sharing an interest over the horse or the horses or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, so did you feel like you had nothing in common with the witness kids? Did you all not share an interest in, I don't know, like whether it was the truth, so to speak, like the being a witness, was that a shared interest at all? Or were there other things that you just didn't feel like you clicked around? They didn't care about the same things you did?
Not really. I never really talked to him a whole lot. Like
Mm.
we all went to different schools because they lived in the next town over, so I didn't go to school with any of them. I never really got to know them. We did like play dates at a young age. Or one time, one of the kids had a sleepover with all the boys of our age in the congregation. I went to that and I hated it, and I made my dad come get me. I was scared. I was in a house I'd never been in before with people who I didn't really know very well, and I was little. I was probably like 5. And all of them knew each other well. They started going to school together. They all grew up there. They all lived, some lived very close to each other. So I kind of felt a little excluded. And also, I was really, really shy. If I wasn't outside doing something, I was usually reading. So I was fairly introverted as a kid. Whether, that's part of that is just my natural personality, but a lot of that was more kind of put upon me because I wasn't allowed to really seek out relationships. I'm one of those kind of people now where I do like to do my own thing. I do enjoy being social. My social battery runs dry pretty fast, but um, I was kind of pushed into being an introvert. So, and I may, that's part of it is just me. But
Well, yeah, you're probably just an introvert. I
yeah,
mean,
but there was a lot of it when I did want to be included and be social. I never really had the opportunity.
mm.
So the kids at the hall, I didn't really get along with. I mean, they were fine, but they were running around and playing and doing all stuff, and I was the mature little unbaptized publisher giving talks when I'm 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah, those
So
expectations do
mhm.
affect the way that you move throughout the congregation, I'm sure.
Yeah, it did, and it affected the way I looked at them.
Yeah.
They're silly. I kind of wanted to play with them a little bit, but not too much.
No, I get
But
that. Well, you're kind of given an identity in the congregation,
You are.
as this mature kid, and there's a lot of pressure then to conform to that, um, and to maintain the relationships that you're building over that particular identity.
Yeah, and like my friend in my grandparents' congregation, we really did click. We had so many things in common that we really both enjoyed. And that was also one of the only relationships I was encouraged to foster
Mm,
as well. Not saying that even, if we neither of us had ever been in this thing, I mean, if we would have met, we wouldn't have gotten along. We would have. Very, we have a lot of things in common. But, um, that is also really the only real friendship I was really encouraged to continue to grow and continue to build. I was encouraged to play with the other kids at the hall, but I didn't really like them. I didn't know them. I never got a chance to know them. They may have been perfectly fine. They were just normal kids. It's nothing they were bad, but they were being kids, and I wanted to be a little adult.
yeah, and I mean, let's face it, and for many Jehovah's Witness kids, we were expected to be little adults.
Hmm.
I mean, I was too. Yeah, you're expected to behave a certain way. They expect you to deal with life and death situations scripturally and things.
Yep,
I mean, they really put a lot of pressure on kids to grow up fast.
they do. They do. Not having like even just getting a kid to sit through a meeting
Yeah.
is ridiculous at a young age. But if you did sit through the meeting, you weren't the kid who was always getting dragged to the bathroom to get their butt beat, then that was good. Like I said, I remember I remember only happening once, but and I think I was probably 3, 4. Who knows what I was doing? I don't know.
Can I
But
ask, so were you in public school throughout, or did you homeschool
yeah,
at some point?
I was in public school all the way through. There was some talk about doing some homeschooling.
Okay.
My parents didn't really want to do that. At one point, I kind of wanted to because I felt so awkward. But and like I say, I like reading. Like, just give me a book, I'll read it. That's fine. But my parents didn't want me to, and I think a lot of that was because they wanted me to learn how to interact with other people enough, with the hopes that when I did get, if you go to homeschool and you're never around anybody else, you don't learn how to, build your defenses against the world. So, I mean, I think that was part of it. They wanted me to learn some social skills, but they never allowed me to be social.
Sure. So that's what I
So
was gonna ask, is like at school, were you were you different at school in any
was
way?
I was very different. I mean, like I said, I was an avid reader. I mean, I could read when I went to kindergarten. My mom was. I mean, I couldn't read really well, but like I say, my mom taught me to read when I was very, very young because I wanted to, because she read all the time, and we would share a lot of that stuff. I mean, I was reading little kids' books, but I could read, and I was always put into, after kindergarten, starting in first grade, we had like, broke up into reading groups by skill level. I was always in like the highest reading. I was reading way, way above my grade level. And that was just what I did. But so that also made me kind of stand out. I was the weird kid who always was always reading a book. And I remember like, even on the playground during recess and stuff like that, I would go on the swings, or um, we had like this, one of the little like jungle gym things. I would go climb on that a little bit, but I would just be doing it by myself.
Hmm.
And there'd be other kids getting together a game and, running around together, doing little races, doing little games and stuff like that. And I always really wanted to play with them, but I didn't know how. And
Yeah,
I
how do you
also
fit in?
I kind of felt like I shouldn't, because these kids aren't my friends. They can't be my friends. They're acquaintances. And if I would ever
That is
talk,
so sad when you think.
if I would talk in the Kingdom Hall about someone at school, if I ever said my friend, even the one kid who lived down the street who really was my friend, if I ever said this is anything about like my friend, if I was service talking to one of this is my friend, is no, this is your acquaintance. These are your friends here. The friends are your friends. That's I wasn't allowed to try and develop that relationship. So I mean, I was an awkward kid, and I probably would have been anyway. But because I was really
None of this
booky and
helps.
no, but I was never taught at a young age
Sure.
to build relationships, to seek out friendship, and how to build just a normal friendship. Everything was transactional. Everything is, well, what are you going to get out of it? Like the kid down the street. Well, you can be friendly with him, but you have to invite him to meetings. And as I got older, like up into high school age, that's your territory. If you're going to be friendly with someone, if someone's going to be your friend, you have to be giving them literature. You have to invite them to a meeting, or they can't be your friend. So it's all, what are you going to get out of that relationship? Everything is so transactional and so, um, what's the right word? How does it look?
Hmm.
You gotta think, how does it look? How does everything you're doing, what would Jehovah think about this? What do the brothers think about this? Would you want the brothers seeing you playing with these kids? Do you want Jehovah to see you playing with all these worldly kids who go to church and worship Satan with their parents? So I never learned to be social.
No, you're instead being actively discouraged from
Yeah.
being social, and it's really, really, really does a lot of damage to people to grow up that way. It's not healthy. It doesn't develop a good relationship with self or a good relationship with others. Teaches us to be possessive and transactional in our relationships,
Hmm.
and it's just not fair. You just
Yeah.
want
And
to be a
that's
kid, and hey, I like a thing, you like a thing, can we hang out? Cool. You know.
Yeah, and it always had to be an all or nothing type of thing too. You can't just have a common interest with someone. That my parents, they did try and do a lot of stuff with me. My parents were, they were very active. They were very involved in me. We spent a lot of time together. We did stuff together, like with Cub Scouts. One of the things the Cub Scout kids that were in Cub Scouts did, there was a cave not too far away from us, a couple hours away, where the Cub Scouts would go and they would camp. They got to sleep in the cave. And that was just the coolest thing. I love caves. I want to do that so bad. So my dad and I, as I got a little bit older, we would go on little camping trips, weekend trips, once or twice a year, just me and him. And he took me to that cave. We went through that cave. We camped at the campground at that cave. I didn't get to sleep in the cave with other kids. But he was trying to because I told him, oh, I really want to do this. I
Yeah, but you said it though.
I asked him, just let me join for this one thing, and then I'll quit.
Yeah, you wanted to do it with other kids.
Yeah,
You don't wanna when you're a child, you don't wanna hang out with adults all the time. You wanna
yeah,
hang out with peers. That's an important part of adolescence and growth. I mean, it's super cool that your parents were trying to be involved, but they were also preventing you from being involved with people your age.
yeah. I mean, my dad, we camped a lot together. We would camp in the backyard together. He was very involved, as much as he could be with working full time. He really tried to be involved with me. My parents love me, and I
Yeah.
know they do. They love me as best as they can because they're both raised in all this too. So, but yeah, everything was just still so limited. There were all these restrictions put on everything. I really do think they did their best, but they didn't have the tools to work with either.
Well, that's the thing, most Jehovah's Witness parents, they don't necessarily have malicious intent. They're
Mhm.
just lacking particular tools, and they have the tools that Watchtower has given them, right?
Exactly, exactly. They were both raised in all this too,
Yep.
so I have a measure of empathy toward them now.
Yeah, of course.
We'll talk later more about how the relationship changed with my parents, but I do have a measure of empathy toward them.
Of course.
At some point, I think that there's also things that you just kind of know are decent, but I do have a measure of empathy for them because I do think they really did try their best to be good parents and to raise me the best that they knew, which is all any of us can really do.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, Alex, I mean, even there's a lot of stories that are on here uh, that where parents were Mhm. Objectively pretty terrible in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. But even in those cases, those parents are giving what they've got, right? They come from somewhere too. Uh, it, whoever they ended up being as parents wasn't in a vacuum. They were impacted by a lot of things over the years that weren't necessarily even in their control. They may have had very positive intent, but it
Hmm.
doesn't erase the damage that it does to other people. And unfortunately, their help or their way of dealing with it all is being taught by Watchtower, which isn't real help and it's not real healthy in a lot of ways. And so it ends up creating some negativity regardless and a lot of pain.
Yeah, and that's one of the things kind of got me as I've finally started to address these things about me and try and work on myself for the last year or two. Um, it kind of made me feel like my story really wasn't worth anything because I wasn't beaten. I wasn't putting the, I did. I hear some of these people's stories about it breaks my heart that people went through also some of this stuff. It's horrifying things I went through. I never went through those direct things, and I'm glad. No, I mean, I was talking to my wife about this when I finally started to look at things and talk to somebody about myself. And I told her how I felt. I felt like, well, my story really isn't important. And she told me something really insightful. She said, your trauma is your trauma. It's what you know. And that really got me thinking. It really helped me really step back and look, well, just because nobody beat me black and blue, and just because, I didn't go through, some of the horrifying CSA stuff that people go through, it doesn't mean that I wasn't treated unfairly. I don't have things I need to work on to help improve myself. And it really puts things in perspective for me.
Yeah, so as the person that a lot of people reach out to to tell their stories, I often hear from people, "Hey, this is my story. I'd like to tell it, but I don't really think it's enough." Or I didn't go through what these other people went through. It's not the abuse Olympics. There's no gold medals handed out for being more traumatized. Trauma's trauma. It's individual and it's enough. But at that, if your story is one of CSA and other things, well, unfortunately, that happens a lot. That's not the average XJW story. The average XJW story also needs to be represented. And I
Yeah.
think it's just good to see that even in the best circumstances and the best situations with maybe parents who were super conscientious and who tried their best, damn it, right? Like, and they were as loving as they could be, and they were really trying. At the end of the day, it still ends up badly because of this
Exactly.
thing, right? Like, no
Yeah.
matter how good it was, it still has this end result that is negative because of the thing that they're involved in and how it has impacted relationships. And that's just a shame. And that's still the average, right? It's still just
Yeah.
the results in destroyed and broken families, ostracism, people who feel like they can't be, they're never enough,
Mhm.
lack of self worth, difficulty socializing, difficulty going for what you want or knowing what you want or getting a career, or like there's just so many things that still come from this thing, even if the child protective services wasn't called, right, and you wouldn't have been removed from the house necessarily.
Yeah. And I think some of that even comes back to that mentality that you develop as a young child about things being performance based and being the best. Well, they're worse than me.
Yep,
So what they went through is worse, so their story is more valid. You know, it really just kind of comes back full circle. So it's a competition. You have the mindset of a competition. It's one-upmanship. Well, this person had it worse, so I'm okay. But that mentality is something I carried for a long time,
of course.
and really starting to address that made me realize that their trauma wasn't better than mine. You know?
No,
And it doesn't
trauma's
mean I don't
very
have a lot of
individual
things I need to
too.
work on because I'm not happy. And I want to be a happy person. I want to be a good person.
Yeah.
So I don't have to one up somebody's story.
Well, I always say all stories matter, and I think that they
They do.
do. And I get so many. There's also there's a variety. I guess by now I've probably released episode 200 and mentioned it, but I think that it's just important to note that there's a variety of JW slash XJW stories out there, and
Mhm.
some people never saw shunning. They never experienced it. It didn't happen around them, and maybe they weren't shunned. I mean, there are people who, for whom that, was never a reality. And it's almost hard for them to believe, or they grew up around a bunch of guys and they all kind of hung out and did some fun things and such. And they really genuinely had a good time. And maybe they still have relationships with those people. Um, but like you still can't be yourself, not
Yeah,
fully, and there's still always the lines and such that you can't cross. It's just a very difficult thing no matter how you shake it out in the end.
it is.
And it's all valid.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about your story? So as you moved, as you got older, as you went through school, as you went through your, like, maybe into your teenage years, or whenever you got baptized, or whatever the case may be, how did things progress for you as you got older?
Yeah, as I started to get a little bit older, got out of elementary school, things really started to change. So one thing I really wanted to do, I've always been interested in music. So my parents did let me join band in school in seventh grade. My uncle had played clarinet in band, and they had an old clarinet, so I was able to play clarinet because we had one. Um, and so I was interested in that, but it was still more like a solo thing. We had the concerts, but it was something that I just kind of did that was my thing. After seventh grade, my dad's work was closing his office and we had to move. And that's when things really started to change for me. We looked at several different areas and ultimately we decided to move to West Virginia from Northern Illinois. We're kind of the edge of the suburbs of Chicago. So I was really kind of torn on this. I didn't want to leave. That was home. And moving quite a ways away was a big, big deal. I didn't want to leave everything and everyone I knew, but I was also kind of excited to do something new. And I would be leaving my grandparents and the couple friends I had, but I was really kind of torn because I wasn't leaving a ton. At the time it was scary, but um, I did. Once we moved here, it was a huge culture shock. Things are very, very different in West Virginia than Northern Illinois.
You mean
You
there's a
know,
difference between Chicago and West
yeah,
Virginia?
dude. Oh my gosh, the culture shock is so different. I had a very, very much had a northern Midwestern accent, and so I talked different from everybody here. And I ran some kids who kind of make fun of that, and I didn't know anybody. Um, I had a really hard time once we moved down here. Um, I got to know a couple boys that lived across the street because I moved down here after seventh grade, right after seventh grade ended. And so I had the whole summer basically before school started. So I met a couple of the kids in the neighborhood, just kind of, yeah, just hey, there are kids here. We would play outside a little bit, but go out and play play tag or whatever, but ride bikes, but not never really made any friends. Um, I ended up becoming pretty depressed after we moved down here. Not only was I the new kid, but I didn't fit in. I didn't really fit into the congregation very well. I ended up making a lot of friends in the congregation, but it was very small. I came from a pretty big congregation, several hundred people, and the congregation here was very, very small. There weren't any other kids my age. There were a couple of very little kids, like 3, 4 years old. Um, like I say, I did make a few friends in the neighborhood, but weren't really friends. We did find a stable nearby, so I could continue with the horseback riding thing, but I never really got into it. We never did. It was a very small stable, and I did the horseback riding lessons, but it was just doing the lessons. There weren't anybody else there. I never did any of the, the competitions or anything down here. I was just kind of doing it because that's what I did.
Mm. That's a
Um,
shame. I was like, West Virginia is a really, at least what I've been through, is a very beautiful place, and
it is.
the people
And we
there
still would go
very
camping
friendly
and
and
stuff
such.
like
But
that.
yeah, but when you're
We do a
new,
lot of outdoor stuff as a family. We continue to do those kind of things.
yeah,
But, I didn't, before I didn't have a lot of people here. I didn't have anybody.
yeah, and you're new,
And
right? You're jumping in later in the game. It's
yeah,
hard.
and I was very at that point I was very tall for my age. During seventh grade, I grew a bunch. I grew over 6 inches that school year. So when I walked into this new school in a strange town with people I've never met, strange, I'm from multiple states away. All the kids are up to here on me, because I was almost 6 foot tall, and I didn't, I was awkward because I had grown so much. I would trip all the time, and I was very clumsy. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any of the same interests. I wasn't allowed to talk to them any way and make friends. I didn't know how to make friends. I didn't know how to be social with anybody my age, and that really brought that out. The only thing I really had was band, so I continued with that. Um, my band director was an amazing guy, best teacher I ever had. He became a really big role model for me. He was young. He was about 28 years old. He was also the band director of the high school because it's a small area. Um, he took a really big interest in me. I think he could tell that he would obviously tell I was awkward and didn't have any friends and didn't know anybody. So he really took an interest in me, and he had a couple of the seniors from the high school who would come down and help him sometimes, who were interested in that, and who were interested in, like, going to school to be band directors and stuff like that. And I would talk with those guys. They took kind of interest in me as well. Um, so after eighth grade, when I went to high school, I switched from clarinet to tuba because I needed a tuba player, and I wanted to do whatever they needed because I was really into it. And there was I ended up sticking with that. That really became my only real social thing in high school. I tried to be the absolute best at that. There were a lot of sticking points with that because that's when you get in high school. That's when you start doing marching band and go to for all the football games and travel with the football team and do the parades. So that was kind of the sticking point. My parents let me do it, but there was a lot of kickback in the congregation on that. Um, they I still never missed a meeting. If there was a band thing on a meeting day, I didn't go. I still was out in service. We had football games on Friday night, Saturday morning. I was out in service, so I was doing all the things. So we didn't get
Was the problem more that you were just hanging out with a lot of non-JW kids and traveling with them and such?
yeah, that was a big thing. So my parents were pretty cool, and they were supportive. They would come to the games and be there to support me, and um, but our band at our school was actually a pretty big deal. We had almost 100 people in the band, and it was a very small school. Our football team was atrocious. They won 5 games my freshman year, 3 games my sophomore year, and didn't win a game my junior or senior year. They were terrible.
Terrible team, but they had a good band.
Yeah, our band was big. The stands were full during halftime. We were good, and I took a lot of pride in that. That was my thing. Um, I was always in every year. I was in all county band and regional band, and you know, I was section leader. That was my thing. That was the only thing I really did. Um, so I was really into that. But there was still a lot of pushback in the congregation. I got a lot of comments from people, out in service. I couldn't talk about it. People who found out I was in marching band, that was bad. But
Yeah, why would you invest time into that? Are you going to be a tuba
yeah,
player in the new system?
yeah, and that's what it is. It was, and I would tell people sometimes it's like, oh, well, I'm going to go to Bethel and be in the orchestra.
Yeah,
I didn't want to be in the orchestra at Bethel,
but it
but
still, I mean, you could
you got to
sing,
say
right?
that.
Yeah.
You got to say that. I didn't want to do that. That was stupid. What I really wanted to do as I got older, I wanted to be in the Marine band. That was something I really wanted. I wanted to join the Marines.
Oh, wow.
I never told anybody that, but because you can't say, oh God, that would be horrible. But I wanted to do it because I wanted to. That was kind of the thing. I was like, oh, I really, that's one of the best bands in the country. So that's the kind of thing you kind of idolize and look for. It's like anybody else, you're playing basketball in high school. Oh, I want to play for the Bulls or the Lakers or the Knicks or something like that. It's never going to happen. But that's the kind of stuff that was in my internal stuff. I never told anybody that because that would be the worst of the worst. I would have gotten yanked out of band and probably yanked out of school if I would have said that to anybody.
Oh,
It was so fast
immediately.
my head would spin.
Yeah.
But the band was a big thing. That was my big social thing. I did have people trying to counsel me about how it would take time away from Jehovah and all that stuff. I don't know if my parents had any direct talks with the elders about it, but I could certainly see that being, taking place. We were still very in good standing with the congregation. We had not too long after we moved here, we started having the book study at our house, and that continued all through high school. So I'm sure they didn't get in too much trouble where they wouldn't let them have the book study at their house. But
Yeah,
there
that's
was definitely,
interesting. That's an interesting juxtaposition because often, yeah, they could have easily said, well, you're not presiding over your household in a fine manner because
yeah,
you're letting your son play the tuba.
yeah,
Uh, and instead, they had the book study at your house. That's
yeah.
interesting.
I think part of it was too, we're such a small congregation. Our territory was kind of divided into two areas. There's a big rural area between, not real far, 15-minute drive, but you had one side and then the other side. And the side we lived on was where there was, tons of neighborhoods and subdivisions and stuff like that. The other side, all the territory was very, very rural. So a lot of people lived on our side, but we had the room and the willingness to have the book study at our house. So
There you go.
I'm sure there was a lot of that too. It's like,
You were
well,
useful.
where else are we going to do it?
Yeah, yeah, you were useful.
So we were useful, and as I said, we were still very involved. We were always at everything. Well, we mowed the grass at the Kingdom Hall and helped with the cleaning. We were always super, super involved with all that kind of stuff. So we were very active. And even in high school, I stayed active with all those kind of things. I wasn't missing meetings. I wasn't missing field service. So it was kind of, well, you can do this, but I knew if I started missing any of that stuff, that would go away.
If you'd like some extra content, if you'd like to learn more about our guests today, maybe even have an opportunity to connect further with them, you can do so by joining the back room tier at patreon.com/shunned. That's a lot of, it's just funny how that all hinges. I mean, it really is just a microcosm of everything and the relationships with Jehovah's Witnesses is you can't, if anything that you do is going to take away from that thing, the witnesses, then it or you has to go.
So we were useful to the congregation as a family.
Sure.
So, we didn't have any other kids my age, so they didn't have anybody else coming up. So, I wasn't really seen as like a rising star or anything, but they didn't want to take a chance of losing one person from a congregation that only has 60 people.
Yeah.
So,
So how'd that go as you, I mean, I don't know where you got baptized in there or whatever, but as you get towards, graduation or maybe 16, that's a big time in life. You get maybe a car or some freedom or something. Like, how did things continue to progress?
well, that's where things really started getting complicated.
Mm,
I was a teenager, so of course everything's complicated anyway. Um, I really got more focused on my social outlet and band. That was where my priorities were. Um, you know, I did try and treat school as my territory, like they say. So I would give out a brochure or something like that. I gave out like a book here and there to some people, but mostly so. I even gave my band director a book because he was going through it. I mean, he was my role model. He was the person who went out of his way to try and make sure I felt accepted. And looking back now, I mean, even when I wasn't really the best in the band, he took a big interest. We're still friends.
Oh, that's cool.
So um, he was very
Shout
important
out
to
to
me, and he
band
was important
director
to a lot
Grant.
of people. Yeah, he was. Yeah, I still keep in touch with him. Um, you know, I did try and treat it as my territory. I didn't really preach to anybody, but I kind of did that more so I could tell my parents and the pushy people at the congregation what I was doing. It's like, oh, I gave this student a book. I gave this person a brochure. I was the only Jehovah's Witness in my school, so that was my territory. Um, Things started getting really a lot harder my sophomore year. Um, I started to have I started to have a small group of friends at school. I really wanted to have a girlfriend. At that age, I've been interested in girls for several years, but that's when it really started getting bad. Um, I ended up getting baptized when I was 15. It was a big deal in the congregation. I was starting to, for a couple of years, I was starting to get oh, when are you getting baptized? When are you getting baptized? Getting that talk. My parents weren't really pushy with it. We did talk about it a little bit. But the people in the congregation, there are always people in there. Oh, the convention's coming up, all that kind of stuff.
So is
So,
that why you got baptized? Was it kind of
well,
the pressure to some degree, or?
that's when I finally did it, but I never had a doubt in my mind I would because I did believe the doctrine.
Okay, so it was
You know,
because
I
you believed it.
Yeah, I believed it. I believed that Jehovah was God and the one true God, and we were the right religion. I wanted to have that social experience, and I wanted to have friends at school, and I wanted to do my own thing. But I did believe it was the truth. Absolutely, I never questioned it. There were a few little things I got hung up on because like some of the evolution creation stuff a little bit, but I kind of justified it. Well, maybe these things did change, but Jehovah created them to do that. You know So, but I absolutely believe there was never a doubt in my mind that I would get baptized.
Mm.
Um, I
And
just
it's
kind of
also
put it
like
off.
the right thing to do. You're gonna get praise for it to some degree. I'm not saying you did it
Exactly.
for that reason, but I mean, it is the only time that like that's the biggest thing you can kind of do in
It,
your young life.
that was one of the big reasons I find it. Besides, I was 15. That's old.
Hmm.
You know, you're this person who says that you're dedicated. You're going out in service and doing all this stuff. You're 15. Why aren't you baptized? You should have been baptized when you were 11.
Yeah,
That's kind of the way I felt.
like
What people
wait
were
until
saying to
you're in
me.
your 20s to get married or something
Oh,
like
yeah,
instead
that'd be
of doing it in
horrible.
your teens. They just
So
they expect you to do a lot really early, and there's a lot of pressure.
they do. Um, when it was a big deal when I got baptized, especially because I was the only person of even any kind of semi-reasonable baptism age. My family is a big deal. My grandparents came down from Wisconsin to go to that convention with us, so they could be there, and it was a big deal. We didn't
Yeah.
really have a party, but it was a big deal. I did the meetings with the elders and everything. I didn't prepare or anything like that. I was raised in this stuff. I can regurgitate anything you want back at you. I knew every bit of it. I didn't have to look anything up or study anything. If you ask me a question, I can spit it back out to you, which is all you're really taught to do anyway.
Sure.
Um, I did say a dedication prayer, but it was very stiff and formal. I was never really into formally praying, even as a young kid. We did, do a prayer at meals and stuff like that. But I did pray as a kid, but it was always more conversationally. Like I would almost I mean, not like talking to voices in my head or anything. I didn't really think anybody was really talking, but I would just kind of talk to Jehovah, especially at night, like laying in bed. I would just kind of talk and like share my thoughts. And because I thought that's what prayer really should be. Prayer shouldn't be this formal stilted thing like like the Catholics do and have all the formal prayers all the bad people do. You should have a relationship with God. So I would talk to him.
That's not how you talk to your own father or a friend or
Yeah.
whatever. You're not like,
And that's how I felt about it.
dear dad.
Yeah.
Like, I want to
Yeah.
sit down and have
Excuse
a
me,
very
Father,
formal
for I have
conversation.
sinned,
In
you
Jesus'
know?
name, of course.
Yeah. But I would talk. I would say, oh, I
Yeah,
would talk about things I was thinking of or things that were troubling me. So I mean, I did pray,
sure.
but I wanted it to be more conversational because it was
Makes
real.
sense.
I wanted it to be a real thing. I didn't want to do the formal I wasn't on my knees at my bed with my hands up. And you never do this. You always do this. You don't want to be like the Catholics or the Christendom. So
Oh, it's wrong to do that.
that's yeah, that's kind of how I was raised. You would fold your hands, but you didn't do this
Oh, that's interesting. I guess I
because
never came across, or I don't know if any. I don't think anybody ever saw. Know that I really was doing any of that anyway, but
yeah,
I never thought about that. So
yeah,
you
we would
can't
always
be
cross our hands like this when we were praying at the table for dinner.
they're
You
so
didn't do this.
pedantic.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
god.
It's like the cross and the torture stake thing. You know?
Again, like appearance focused, right? It's you can get in trouble. Your prayer is nixed if you do the praying hands instead of the I don't know whatever you call the clasping hands.
Yeah,
Good Lord, it's so
yeah.
dumb.
Exactly. Yeah, this the stupidest little crap that they get people get hung up on. And I don't know if that's really like a whole doctrinal thing or just something we did. But thinking back, like in the magazines, you didn't really see a lot of. I don't really remember seeing anybody with like the prayer hands, but you'd see people with their hands clasped.
Yeah, you're probably right. I never paid any attention to that. I didn't know it was a
I
big
I
deal.
I never really thought about. That's just what I was taught.
Wow. Yeah, no, you're probably right.
I
Wow.
mean, I'd have to look back. I don't have any of the magazines anymore, but I'm sure that there's a lot of pictures like that.
Interesting.
um, yeah, when I got baptized. I really big reason I did it is I was having all these thoughts, about girls and wanting to do this and all that stuff. So I thought it would be a protection for me. I thought it would help me strengthen me spiritually. I said, well, I really need to do this because I'm having all these thoughts,
So
these
I'm having
impure thoughts.
normal adolescent
Yeah, normal
thoughts
teenage boy thoughts.
about the opposite sex, and
Yeah,
I've got to be protected from that. So I'm going to get baptized.
yeah,
I mean, that's the way
yeah.
it
I
works,
was
isn't it?
yeah. I'm biologically attracted to this person, and that's a bad thing. So so I thought that would really strengthen me. It didn't work. Big surprise. I still wanted a girlfriend. I did get more responsibilities in the hall, which I did really like, but things were pretty much the same as far as my thoughts and feelings. I got to run the mics and help out the literature counter and all that stuff. And, you know, I, since we were such a small congregation, even before I was baptized, I did have some responsibilities. One thing I really liked is I would often assist the elder who was conducting the theocratic ministry school. I got to be his assistant, so I'd help him keep his little file card on everybody on what they're working on, and I would sit there. I got to ring the bell as a kid. That was
Ringing
cool.
the bell was great.
Oh, I loved it.
It was great.
Um,
It's power.
yeah, I would watch that. I'd have the stopwatch, and I would control the stopwatch, and I could ring the bell. I loved it. Um, but I loved running the mics and doing all that stuff during the. I love doing anything during the meeting. Anything during the meeting, I would do uh, because I didn't have to pay attention. Yeah, because I was bored. And I would always love doing that stuff. If somebody didn't show up for a talk, I would volunteer to prepare a talk real quick because I could spend the first part of the meeting back in the library preparing something. I'd have to listen. And if it wasn't that great, it was done on the fly, so you still get that praise. Oh, you're helping out. You're being such a great asset to the congregation. So I loved all that stuff. Um, so that stuff was good, but as far as me personally, nothing really changed on how I felt or how things were going at school. That was all still hard. There was in my little, I got to get a little friend group, mostly from people in band. There was one girl I had a big crush on. I never said anything to her, but there was another girl who was a pretty good friend of mine who lived close by that talked me into dating her younger sister. Um, her younger sister thought I was cute, and she thought I should. So I did. I dated her for a couple weeks. I didn't have any concept of what it's like to date. We were just, it was almost like when you hear like kids in elementary school or middle school say they're dating and they hold hands. And
Sure.
I'm 15 years old, but that's how I acted because I didn't know what to do. But I was very serious about it because if I'm dating, you're dating for an eye to marriage. Even though we never did anything or anything like that, I felt horribly guilty about this. So I ended up telling my parents about it and had a meeting with the elders. That
Because
was
you
my
were
first
dating
real
someone
meet.
who was not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, right?
Yes, yes. And I'm 15. She was 14. We held hands. I felt so guilty. So I went to my parents and went to the elders about it. That was my first backroom meeting. And at that time, we talked about it and talked about, all the things you'd be giving up. I'm newly baptized. I was baptized like 6 months. All these things I'd be giving up with my family and everything. I broke down. I was in tears. It was horrible. I said, "Oh, I'm ending it. I'm not going to do it." Um, and honestly, I really didn't like her anyway. It was it's not like I had this big thing for this girl. She
I
was
was gonna,
fine. There was nothing wrong with her. Just it's not like I was really interested in her.
I was gonna say you were kind of pushed into it or coerced to some
Yeah,
degree. And
I'm
what JW knows how to say no. Like I was saying, like how did you break up with her? Because it's not like we were ever really taught how to handle any situations or to say no or anything.
I told her I couldn't because of my religion.
There you go. That's the way that you're told
It's
to
against
shut
it's
down
against my
everything.
religion. The same
Always
thing you're
against the
taught.
religion.
The same thing you tell people when you're 5 years old and they want you to have a birthday cake at school or part of the class party. I was always a kid sitting in the hallway reading a book. Everybody said, "Why aren't you doing this?" Against my religion, against my religion, against my religion. It's your go-to answer for everything.
No, because everything's against your religion.
Yeah,
There's not much you can do.
yeah. I did lose some of my privileges of handling mics for a few months and stuff like that, but I was never reproved at all. I'm sure because the first time we talked, I went to him right away. The first time we talked, I broke down, broke it off with that girl right away. Really did completely break it off with her. Um, I was very sincere about that. So for after a few months, I started being able to do things in the congregation again. I never, I was always allowed to comment and do all that kind of stuff. There was never anything said. It was more they were overall, I guess. I don't want to say they were cool about it because it was a stupid thing to do, but they weren't like really pulling out the big guns against me at that point. And about it, so I kind of went back to my own thing because I'm still, a horny 15-year-old and love girls. And um, so a few months later, I'd started a relationship with a girl at school who I was interested in. By that point, I learned my lesson. I didn't tell anybody. It's kind of funny how it started too. Um, we were kind of still part of that same friend group. It was actually the girl who I initially had a big crush on. And for a band, we were doing this big fundraiser. We would sell like boxes of fruit. That was our big fundraiser of the year. And man, I was knocking it out of the park. I mean, I had hundreds and hundreds of dollars of fruit sold. And she was talking about that she was really nervous about going around trying to ask people in her neighborhood. And she lived not too far from me, a couple subdivisions over. So, we were just kind of friends. And, I thought she was beautiful, but I didn't think I would ever try that again after what happened before. So I said, "Well, I can come help you sell. I mean, I know how I can knock on doors. I can knock on doors and talk to anybody." That's one life skill I learned. Um,
Yes.
so I would, so I went over I went over, I was 16 and went over to her neighborhood and I was like, "Okay, let's go. This is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to do. This, you're not going to take no for an answer." I knew how to get something in somebody's door.
Is there something
And
in the reasoning book for fruit sales?
I don't know, man, but I took all my skills I learned on conversation stoppers. Man, I knew how
Yes,
to answer all that stuff.
of course.
So we went around and we spent that Saturday afternoon going door to door in her neighborhood selling fruit. We sold a ton of it. And then afterward, like her parents, invited me to stay for dinner. Her family is wonderful. They were so nice. They had never seen me before. But I was this kid coming over, hanging out with their daughter, helping her sell some fruit. It wasn't a big deal to them. And she had a little brother who I got along with. Her family was so nice. They're just normal people.
Mhm.
Um, they were so kind and welcoming, and let me in. They didn't care. I didn't come in. They didn't ask me where I went to church or anything like that. They didn't give a crap. I was just some kid. We After that, we spent the afternoon together. We became really, really close. And about a month later, we did start dating. And that was my junior year. We dated for the rest of our junior year. Um, I was head over heels in love with this girl. She was, I thought she was beautiful. She was very nice. She was very funny. We just got along great. We actually did go to prom together. That was a huge fight. But I really wanted to go. And she was moving after her junior year. So we had a big fight with my parents, but they ended up backing down. My mom drove us. We were there. It picked us up, took us home. There was nothing that went on, but I really, really wanted to go. My parents knew it was important to me, and we had some fights about that. After I was starting to become a teenager, that's when sort of the conflict between my parents and I would start to butt heads. But they did back down a little bit and let me do this. It was very, very restricted
Oh,
on
I'm
what we
sure.
could do, but they did let me go to prom with her. Um, and then after our junior year, she moved away. She moved to Louisiana because her dad got transferred. I was devastated. Um, I was perfectly down for doing a long distance thing, but she didn't want to because she's a normal 16, 17-year-old girl and realizes that that's not very practical.
Sure,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so
I
we
would
broke up.
imagine it's gotta be hard to be you in that situation. Your heart's broken. Your parents, I don't know how they reacted, but I could see them, maybe not rubbing it in your face, but being kind of happy or
I think
relieved
they were
that it's
relieved. I
over.
think they were relieved because they knew I cared about her more than just as a friend.
Right.
Um, she would come over. My parents met her. They were nice to her. She was a good person. Um, but
But I
we
mean,
we stayed
you're
for
not gonna get a lot of support around that broken heart, perhaps.
no, no, no. I couldn't even mention it. I could just say, "Oh, I'm sad my friend's gone," but I couldn't talk about it at all. I couldn't cry in front of them or anything like that. No, I had to internalize all that. I was like, "Oh, my friend's moving. That stinks."
Yep.
But we stayed friends for many years. She actually got married about 5 years later, and I was in her wedding. This is after I was disfellowshipped. Um, I had met the guy she married a couple of years afterward. They had come up for a vacation. He was a nice guy. We got along. By this point, we're just friends. We still
Sure.
talked and stuff like that. But we were really good friends. And I planned to go to her wedding because I wanted to go to she was one of my best friends. So I wanted to go to her wedding. Um, and actually, a couple weeks before the wedding, one of the groomsmen had to cancel, and she wanted me to be in her wedding. So she talked to him, and he was fine with it. And went down to New Orleans and spent a few days with them, and shared a hotel room with the other groomsmen. Got to know them. We got along just fine. You know, it was a good trip. So I was actually in her wedding, which was kind
Funny
of
how
weird.
life works.
But yeah, like her dad picked me up at the airport, and I hung out with her family, and her family was great. She was a really good person. She went out and lived her life, and but we stayed in touch for many years. We stayed Facebook friends for the last maybe 10 years or so. We never talked after that. She actually recently passed away,
Oh,
uh,
I'm sorry.
kind of unexpectedly. I don't know any of the details because at this point I'm just getting updates on Facebook, but she was a good person. She was very important to me at that age of my life. So after she moved, I ended up starting dating another girl and still kept my double life going. Um, that wasn't really a good relationship. I mostly stayed in that because like, well, if I'm going to date somebody, I have to plan on marrying them because I was very much gung ho. I couldn't just date somebody like most teenagers could. I mean, those are only two people I actually really dated. And I wouldn't back down from that. And with this one girl who moved, I did really care about her. but I think I pushed the relationship farther than it should have been because for her it was just a high school relationship.
Of course.
But for me, if you're gonna date somebody, you gotta treat it like you're planning on marrying them. Even though I never would have because I had to convert her first, or I wouldn't be able to.
Right. Yeah.
So that other girl we dated through my senior year, it was not a good relationship. But by God, I'm going to commit something. I'm committed to it. Um, so my parents never knew about any of those relationships. They never even met that second girl. But that's pretty much all I ever did. I never did anything really crazy. I never ran out and did a bunch of other stuff. I did have sex, but during my senior year with that second girl, but that was limited, and I never ran out and went to parties and did all kinds of stuff. Um, so that's kind of after high school is when things started getting really bad. So during my junior year, I did take my ACT. I scored pretty well, and that, along with music, led to me having quite a few scholarship offers to multiple schools. My parents were okay with me going to college as long as I had my priorities straight, and I was going to just to get a job to support myself, but still, like I say, my dad was pretty financially responsible. He understood that I couldn't live as a window washer like most of the pioneers in the congregation. He wanted me to, even though the world was going to end, he wanted me to plan and be prepared and be able to have a comfortable life. I couldn't go do anything to be super rich, but he wanted me to have a job to support myself. But I could only go to a local small school. So all these scholarship offers I had were no go. So I went to a small local state college. I did go on a music scholarship to pay for it because they were very, very happy to have me at a
Oh,
small
wow.
school.
So you full paid?
Full pay, 100% free ride,
Wow.
just to be in the band. I could have gone to a lot bigger schools on scholarship as well, and I think they were like, well, I had scholarship offers from some major universities, and music scholarships, and I actually got offered an engineering scholarship to a pretty big school just based off my ACT scores. But of course, I can't go away to school. That's the worst
Nope.
thing. I wanted to. God, I wanted to,
Where
but
was it?
no. The scholarship offers?
Yeah. Where would you have gone for that?
The engineering scholarship was offered from Boston College,
Oh,
and
nice.
then I had scholarship offers out west, California. Most of them were music scholarships. Ohio State, I got an offer from WVU.
Oh, Ohio
Marshall,
State has a cool band.
yeah, I really wanted to go to that one because their band
I
is
bet you
awesome.
did.
And but out west had offers to come and audition for scholarships at a lot of big schools out west, Stanford, UCLA, big schools.
Yeah.
Most of those, including the Ohio State thing, was an offer, just an invitation to come and audition, and we'll give you a scholarship. The biggest one I got an offer to. I got an offer just to attend. It wasn't a scholarship. They don't do scholarships, but you have to be invited to even apply to attend to study music in Vienna, Austria.
Oh, wow.
So that would have been amazing.
Yeah.
They say they don't do scholarships. You're not even allowed to apply without an invitation at a music conservatory in Vienna. But that's a big deal there.
Yeah.
I wanted to do that so bad. But I went to a small state college, and I actually initially went as a biology major because I wanted to go into physical therapy. When I was after seventh grade, when I grew a lot, I had some knee problems. I had to do some physical therapy, and it made a big impression on me. And that girl who I liked who moved out of state, she wanted to go to school to be a physical therapist, so I wanted to be a physical therapist too. So I still kind of at that point, I was still very interested in her.
Well, sure.
And I thought maybe, I kind of had this like pipe dream that we both go to school and be physical therapists and then we'd end up back together or something like that. Who knows? Just stupid teenage stuff.
Normal teenage stuff.
Yeah, but still stupid because kids are dumb.
Yeah.
And I was a dumb teenager, just like most people.
Sure.
College was really, really hard. Of course, I lived at home. It was only about half an hour away. Um, it was really, really hard. I didn't study in high school. I never learned how to study. High school wasn't really that hard. The only thing I struggled with in high school was math, and I just decided I wasn't good at it, so I just took low-level math classes that were easy. But I mean, my parents let me do like AP English and AP History and all that stuff. It just wasn't hard. Most just because I read all the time anyway. I was still an avid reader. But when I got to college, you actually have to study. So I just stopped going to those classes because I never learned how to study. And I didn't want to study. And I didn't want to do anything that was hard. One little funny story from that, my freshman biology class, the first lecture, I brought my instructor the creation book.
I'm sure he was so thankful.
Yes. I gave it to him. To his credit, he just took the book and didn't laugh in my face. So I ended up dropping his class anyway because it was hard. So I only went to a couple lectures. So I do appreciate the fact that he didn't look at me and say, you know, what the heck is this? You're an idiot. He just took it and moved on. He was a professional. And I'm sure it's probably not the first time. We live in the Bible Belt here, so I'm sure it's not the first time somebody's approached him about creationism versus evolution. As a professor in biology, I'm sure he's gotten it before.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
But I mean, I don't even remember the guy's name, but I do appreciate the fact he didn't just mock me. I actually ended up spending most of my time hanging out in the lounge of the Fine Arts Building. Just kind of there was always a group of people who would just kind of intermix and hang out there. I kind of hung back in like his chairs and back part, but I really wanted to be part of something. I really wanted to make some friends. Um, and they just kind of started accepting me in the group. I'm this freshman kid. They just kind of, oh hey man, come over. They were so nice. They were so accepted. They didn't know anything about me. I was just some weird kid. You're a college freshman. You're all awkward and don't know anything. And they were a little bit older, and they just kind of took me right in. They were so kind. I did start doing some bad things at that point. I started smoking because some of them would smoke, and no one ever pressured me and said, never came like, "You're a kid, you have to smoke to be one of us." But they would talk. They'd go outside and smoke. I'd follow them out there, and I just started smoking with them. Mostly to fit in. But
That's how you make friends as a witness, right? You do whatever they do to fit in.
exactly, because I would always do this as I got into high school, and I continue this into my adult life, where I would try and change my personality for whoever was around because I wanted to be what they thought was good,
Yep.
and so they would expect of me. So I started hanging out with those people. Started drinking a little bit, but I never drank very much. We'd go. There was a little bowling alley nearby they would go to, and I would go, and they didn't care how old you were, and I'd have a beer, but I never got drunk with them or anything like that. I was still living at home, so I would usually just go there and hang out in the lounge when I was supposed to be in class. And that lasted for about a year and a half before I dropped out because I wasn't going to class, so I was failing everything. And then I started working full time. At this point, I'm still going to all the meetings. I'm still ground service. I'm auxiliary pioneering in the summers. I'm still trying to keep up that face. But that's one of the things I read because that's when I was getting so deep into this double life, and I couldn't be who I wanted to be, and I really didn't know who I was. So after about a year or so of that working, year and a half or so, I enrolled in school at another local college. So I decided I wanted to go back to school, and I decided to go in for music. Like, screw it. This is the only thing I know how to do. I'm going to do this. And I started going to that, and I kind of did the same thing. I would only go to the classes that were easy and wouldn't go to the hard classes, but I was still smoking. And there was a boy about my age from a congregation next door who was also taking classes there, and he saw me smoking. So he called me. He got my number from somebody and called me. I didn't really know him. I knew who he was, but I didn't know him. And told me he saw me smoking and said that I need to go to the elders or he will. You're taught that if you see someone sinning, you share in their sin. So he was doing what he was
Yeah.
taught.
You don't say something
I was
about it, you're as guilty as they are.
Yeah, I was so mad at him at the time, but looking back, I kind of understand where he was. He was probably feeling really guilty about this too. I still didn't like the guy. I was so pissed off at him.
Sure, yeah.
But I didn't. I said, okay, I'll tell the elders. I didn't because I was too scared.
Sure.
So he did, and I got dragged into the back room and got confronted about smoking. And I admitted to it. And they started asking me about anything else. I didn't say anything else that I was doing. I didn't say anything about, occasionally drinking. At that point, I would just turn 21, so it was legal. But I still wasn't like a heavy drinker or anything like that. Um, and but I didn't tell them about, having girlfriends in the past or anything. And it was just the smoking thing. That was it. I was still attending meetings. I was still doing what I was supposed to do. And I got disfellowshipped.
Hmm.
So that was a real kick
Wow,
in the
you had
butt for me.
disfellowship for smoking cigarettes.
Smoking cigarettes.
Did you?
As far as they knew, that's all I was doing. Um, it was really hard. There were two of the elders in that meeting, in that judicial committee. I didn't even realize it was a judicial committee at the time. You didn't really know much about the inner workings of the congregation. I didn't really know much about the inner workings of the organization. This is in the 90s. So this is before, the website and the video streams. I knew who the president of the society was because when one of them died, I heard there was a new one, but that was just kind of it. These were just people. The governing body and all this stuff they weren't a big thing that everybody knew. Your average witness. It wasn't a big deal. They weren't the celebrities they are now. I didn't.
And you probably just went to that meeting thinking, "Well, I'm just going to go meet with the elders." Not like, "Oh, this."
Yeah,
is
I knew it was serious. I knew I was in trouble.
Sure.
But I didn't really know what a judicial committee was.
Oh,
We
look,
didn't
there's
have
three
them a
brothers.
lot.
They must really like me. They want to talk.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they didn't.
Yeah.
Nobody in our congregation since I've been there had been disfellowshipped. It was such a small congregation. Most people were older. I'd never been around it. There was one family that was coming to meetings, and then after a while, they weren't there anymore. But nothing was ever announced. I figured they just pieced out. They were always kind of on the fringe of the congregation anyway. Because I didn't really know what was going on. I mean, I knew I had done something wrong, but there were two of the elders on the judicial committee were from our congregation, and there was one from a neighboring congregation who I'd never met. And the elder who disfellowshipped me is someone who I was very, very close with. They lived not too far from us, spent time with this guy. He was an electrician by trade, and I had gone to some quick builds with him and worked on some electrical work because I was kind of interested in that at the time. We were really big into the quick build thing around. So my dad was always there. I would go and build kingdom halls and stuff. And I was just floored when he disfellowshipped me. And I had no idea that I was going to it was that serious. I mean, I knew it was bad and I knew it was wrong, but I didn't even know about the different types of, private reproof, public reproof, or anything, because none of it happened in that congregation. And
Yeah, they went straight to disfellowshipping.
oh yeah, they kicked me to the curb, man. And looking back on it, I think there were a lot of things building up to that. I think it was the fact that I had gone to college. It was the fact that I had been in band and I had socialized with worldly people. And I really think, and I don't know this, but he had a daughter who was quite a bit younger than me. She would have been at this time, I was 21, she'd have been like 12. And I think that he saw that as a way to protect his kid from a possible bad influence in the congregation. I don't know that.
be.
That's just me just trying to look at things. He's like, why is this guy who I was really close with? I really like this guy. There are quite a few people in the congregation that I got pretty close with. A lot of the pioneers, a lot of them were younger. They had come from, to serve where the need was greater and stuff like that. They're in their 20s and 30s. And, these are people who I hung out with all the time, went to service with and socialized with and did things with. These were the people who I was friendly with in the congregation. They weren't really my peers, and I couldn't really be myself around them. I sure couldn't tell them that I was talking what I talked about with people at school or what I did with people at school. But we were very friendly. I thought they cared about me. I thought these were the people who would end up being my real friends. I thought I was just like some confused teenager and didn't really know what I wanted with life, and that was partially true. But I thought the people in the congregation really cared about me, and at that point, I was just devastated. I mean, and I had to drive home and tell my parents.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, how did that go?
Yeah. No, at that point, I had moved out to an apartment about 6 months prior, which was right close to where I was going to school, and I was working up there. It's still just half an hour away from my parents' house, and I still went to meetings at their congregation and stuff like that. But I had to drive home and tell my parents because they knew I was having a meeting. I'm sure they knew about judicial committees. My dad had been an elder and stuff like that. They knew probably more than I did about how serious it was when they wanted to meet with me. And I had to tell my dad I was disfellowshipped, and that's one of 2 times in my life I've seen my dad cry. And even now, it. My dad's. He's not the kind of person who cries. I saw him cry then, and I saw him cry when I was younger. We took a trip to Washington, D.C., and we saw the Vietnam Memorial.
Hmm.
And my dad found people he went to high school with that had been drafted and were killed. He found their name on the walls, and he cried then. Those are the only 2 times I've ever seen my dad shed a tear.
Well, to him, this was a death, right?
Exactly. It's the same thing.
Yep.
His son's dead. He's spiritually dead now.
Yep.
And they told me that I said, well, I guess I'm going to go to my apartment. And they told me that if I wanted to, I could move back home. And, he said, if you do move back home, you're going to every meeting, you're doing everything. And at that time, I told him, I'm going to do everything. I said, I'll be back in 6 months. Of course, I told my parents that because that's what they wanted to hear. And that's what I felt at the time
Sure.
because I was heartbroken. But I didn't want to move back home because I really didn't want to be back home with my parents. I was 21 years old. I just started getting a little bit of freedom, getting my own
Yeah, they're
apartment.
only inviting you back home so they can control you and get you back in that tiny box, right? I mean,
Exactly. And at the time, I wanted to go
have
back in that box.
contingencies.
Part of me wanted to go back in that box
Of course.
because that's the only thing I really knew.
Yeah.
Uh,
Who am I without this box or outside of this box?
that was a big thing because I didn't have anything outside of that box that was real. I was making friends with worldly people, and I was smoking, and I was doing things I shouldn't do. But still, I still believed in it. I still believed the doctrine. I still believed it was the
that
truth.
outside stuff was more real than this thing that was in the box, right?
The outside stuff I was starting to do was me starting to actually find myself a
Yeah,
little bit.
that was real. That was really you.
That was me finding things that really mattered to me and finding people that did value me and that I could actually start to try and not just be myself, but figure out who the hell I was.
Yeah.
So I wasn't anybody. I didn't know who I was without this. So I went back to my apartment that night and, I cried myself to sleep, but I didn't go back to the meetings because of the shame of it all. I felt so ashamed that didn't want anyone to see my face. And I get this inner monologue where I'm just wrong. I'm broken. I'm terrible. I'm a horrible person. And I'm not worth the congregation. I'm not worth it. I'm not worthy of Jehovah's love. I'm not worthy of any of this stuff. So I had dealt with some depression and stuff as a teenager, probably to a normal amount. of any teenager. It wasn't, looking back, it probably wasn't that severe. Not anything that I would need like, professional treatment for. Um, but at this point, I fell into a horrible depression. I was dead to myself. I was damned.
Well, I mean, there you go. I was damned. Shame. Shame is what this is about, right? This fellowshipping is shaming, and it's about you are a bad person because you did.
Exactly. I wasn't even so much about what I did. I wasn't just guilty about feeling guilty about what I was, but as I've learned more about this, it's just pure shame. I was wrong. This is the truth. Jehovah is right. The organization is right. The congregation is right. The elders are right. The Bible is right. All the magazines are right. I'm wrong. I'm the problem.
Yeah, not I did
I'm not.
something wrong.
No,
I'm wrong.
I was. I was horrible, and I was not worthy of living. I fell into horrible depression. Um, Started medicating with alcohol very heavily. I became a very bad alcoholic. I ended up dropping out of school because I was doing the same kind of thing. I went and then I just wouldn't go and it was hard and I couldn't do anything. So I kept working. I always held a job. I never missed work. But, and I did still have some social relationships, but all of them became centered around alcohol. All my relationships, basically, all the things, the people who I found were my friends were people I was at the bar with. And I would go to the bar. Um, the bar I went to most of the time opened about 4. I was there at 4. Or I was there as soon as I got off work. I would drink until I couldn't stand. I'd black out, puke, just get blitzed. Go back home, drink until I passed out.
Very self-destructive, right? Not
Very
treating
self-destructive.
yourself well.
And honestly, I wanted to die.
Of course.
I was suicidal. Several times I came up with a good plan. I never attempted it, but I had things planned out. I was
All
going to jump.
because you
I knew where I knew where I was going to jump from. I knew exactly where and when. I had it planned. Several times throughout my life, I've gotten to that point. I never actually made an attempt, but I knew I had it planned out. Because what the hell is the point? I'm going to
Sure.
die anyway. I'm not worth anything. No one can love me. No one can care for me because no one can really care for me because the only people who really know how to love me are the congregation, and they won't because I'm bad. So, I would still, try and keep up some social relationships with people, worldly people. But again, it was all everything I did, everything that actually I put any effort toward involved alcohol. So I was drunk every single day.
Can I ask, did you, during this period where you're so depressed, drinking a lot, suicidal, did you ever reach out to your folks or anything?
Mm-mm.
Hmm.
No, I didn't talk to him. I think we may have. When I moved out of my apartment, I moved in. I got a roommate, and my dad helped me move my stuff. And then a couple years later, I had to move into another house because my roommate was moving away. So I got another roommate, and my parents came and helped me move my stuff. And I would talk to them briefly, periodically, but I told them I was fine. I didn't
Of
tell them
course.
anything. They would ask if I was about going to meetings anytime I would talk to them, and I told them I said I'm working on it. You know, and I was kind of like I had the thought like I knew I should do it,
Well,
but
yeah, you're saying again what you have to say.
but I was so ashamed.
Yeah.
I couldn't show my face there. And then by this point, I'm a raging alcoholic. I mean, unfortunately, I never really got into any other drugs. I tried cocaine a couple times, but I stopped that real quick because I liked it way too much. Um, but just a little bit. And that was, this is all over 20 years ago. And but I didn't get wrapped up in drugs. I'm surprised I didn't, and could definitely see myself getting wrapped up in heavy drug use. But I didn't let myself do that and I always went to work. I mean, I guess you could say I was a functional alcoholic because I always went to work. I never missed work. But when I wasn't at work, I was drunk. And then a couple of years after passed, and I was at the bar one night, and a couple of guys I knew. One guy, I was dating a girl for quite a while at this point. It still was not a healthy relationship because I didn't know how to have a healthy relationship. It wasn't really abusive. We were just together because we were together.
Sure.
Um, the one of the guys I was there with brought his girlfriend. It was pitcher night. I knew which night at every bar was what deal. So I went to pitcher night, and I was the guy who went to pitcher night and didn't get a glass. I would just drink 4 or 5 pitchers of beer. I mean, it was bad. But he brought his girlfriend, and she brought a friend, and this was just a couple days before Christmas. Yeah, this girl was she was cute. She was pretty. I liked her. For some reason, she liked the alcoholic too. So we ended up getting together pretty quickly and started dating. Our relationship was kind of a little off and on for about the first year. And then at this point, I was waiting tables. And I got a job as a restaurant manager. Big promotion, I was like, okay, now I can actually have a career. Started, kind of getting my life. I was drinking cut back a little bit. I was still drinking every day, but I wasn't just getting blackout drunk. And I ended up going out of state for my management training for a few months. And at this point, I started talking to this girl all the time. I didn't know anybody. I was in a strange place, didn't know anybody. Started talking to her, and we got pretty serious after that. So we got pretty serious. And about this time, I was like, I got to get my life together. So I did start going back to meetings for a couple months. I started going to meetings in the town I was in, where I didn't know anybody. And I went in, and you go in late, and you sit back, and somebody approaches you, and you tell them you're just fellowshipped. And I would go almost every week. But I really kind of started looking at it differently. I started really listening. And oh my God, it's so stupid. Just the stupidity of it. Like I got a little shocked. Like, these are all the same patterns of speech and the same things we've always talked about that I've always heard. These people are dumb. This stuff is dumb. Like, this doesn't make any damn sense. I'm coming into it. I've been disfellowshipped for about 5 years. And I went back because I want to start getting my life together. And I thought that's the right thing to do. I got to go to the Kingdom Hall. I'm going to get my life together. I got to get back in Jehovah's good grace.
But you had perspective and space now.
I did. I started having some life experience and some perspective. I started seeing things from the outside. And it didn't make sense. So I ended up quitting going. And, after about another year, I got really serious with this girl. We moved in together. And I was still working as a restaurant manager. We ended up moving to another city about an hour away, still here in West Virginia, for my job because I got transferred to another store. And she came with me, and we got pretty serious. And by this time, I still hadn't talked to my parents. I hadn't spoken to my parents for about 6 years by this point. And we talked, and my mom contacted me, and to tell me that my dog was dying. That I had gotten not too long after we moved to West Virginia. He was, that dog was my only real friend for a long time, but he was old. and they thought they were gonna have to come put to sleep soon because he was fading fast. And she wanted to know if I wanted to come see him, and I did. And she came to my apartment and picked me up and took me to see the dog. And because at this point, her and I were sharing a car. We were struggling pretty bad financially, and of course, I didn't tell my parents I was living with anybody.
Sure.
I didn't tell her anything about her. Um, it was one bedroom apartment, and as far as she knew, I was just living there by myself. And so I went and saw the dog and cried a little bit, and she took me back, and it really got me thinking. I said, you know what? I really like this girl, and she's good for me. At that point, I was still drinking, but it had been cutting back down a lot. I was getting drunk maybe once a week or so, which is a big improvement for me. And part of that, I was working so much, I didn't have time. But I was really trying to get my stuff together. And I finally decided, we'd never talked about getting married because in my mind, I couldn't marry her. She wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. I can't do that because I still believe that it was the truth. But I was starting to question the the congregation, the people, the organization. But I still believe the doctrine was true. And I still believe the Bible was true. I just thought the people were dumb. And so I finally told her, I was like, you know what? I want to get married. And we were grocery shopping when I said, do you want to get married? And she said, yes. Didn't have a ring, didn't do anything. We didn't have any money, man. We were broke. And I ended up going to a pawn shop nearby and bought a couple wedding bands. And I called my parents. And I told them I'm getting married. And the only thing my mom said to me was, I'm glad you're with a girl because we thought you might be gay. What? Where did that come from? I mean, nothing, I've got friends who are gay. I mean, maybe they thought that because when I did have roommates that knew I was rooming with men, because we had roommates. The first roommate that I did have, they didn't know this, but he was gay. I mean, he was a friend, he was a great guy, but I didn't care that he was gay at that point.
Sure.
I needed a roommate. He needed a roommate.
Your parents are the ones who would care.
Yeah, though they would have cared, man. I mean, I still thought homosexuality was a sin,
Sure.
but I didn't really care what he did. I needed a roommate. It was a financial arrangement anyway. He was a nice guy, but that was the first thing she said. And I really drove my short. I was like, what?
What a weird thing to say.
Yeah, you haven't talked to me in years.
Weird
You
thing to
finally
say
talked
on
to me
many
and tell me my
levels, but
dog's dying.
probably the
I
first
tell you I'm
question
getting
out of her
married,
mouth.
and all you care about is that I'm marrying a woman.
Okay.
That's weird, but whatever. So I told him we were initially just planning on going to the courthouse, but we decided we wanted to do something. And we found a little bed and breakfast nearby, and we talked to them, and they would let us stay there for the night and do the wedding there for $100. Great deal.
Wow, that's a deal.
I mean, even this was in 2007, so even then it was still a great deal. And a guy that I worked with baked our cake for us for like $20 just for the ingredients. And I invited my parents, and of course, and they said, no, we don't want. And I said, you at least want to meet her. And they said, we don't want to meet her until you're married because you're living in sin. That was stupid. So we got married at this little bed and breakfast. Her family was there, and my boss came. That was the only person who was there for me. And I mean, we were so broke. Like I bought my sport coat at Target, and she bought a dress. It was a prom dress that was on sale because it was after prom season. We were broke, man. We were scraping together pennies for the last week before every paycheck. But we got married. It was nice. It was still really, really nice. I was sad that no one was there for me. It was all her family. which her family is great. By this point, I got to know them pretty well. Her family is awesome. And so we got married, and then like a week later, I took her to meet my parents because that's when they were willing to meet her. And I've been so deferential for years toward anything my parents would want to do. If they wanted to talk to me, they want to do anything, I would bow down to whatever they wanted.
Part of that shame, right?
It is. Um, and so they met her, but that was about it. When we went about our lives, and we moved again to another town right nearby, and I was still working at the restaurant, and she was working at a bank. And our relationship was okay, but I was working all the time. And I started to realize that my marriage is not going to succeed if I'm always at work. And I was still drinking. On my days off, I was still drinking. So that's when I finally made the decision. Um, I was getting ready to turn 30. I was like, I got to get my act together. So that's when I decided to go back to school. It was really, really hard because I thought I thought I couldn't do it. I thought I was too dumb for school. Because when I did try college before, I failed because I didn't go, because I didn't apply myself. And I thought it was too stupid. But I was like, you know what? I got to make a change because we're struggling. We're miserable. I'm never home. I was working 80 to 100 hours a week. I'm never home. So, and our relationship wasn't that great. We still got along fine, but I was never there. And I was not emotionally available to her at all because I didn't know how to do that. I still had a lot of the thinking. I was still very black or white about things. I was very strict about a lot of things. I remember when we got married, the person who married us was a retired Baptist preacher who owned the bed and breakfast, and he said he'd marry us, but he wanted to meet with us first. And so we met with him. We talked just real brief. He just wanted to get to know us a little bit, and he talked about divorce. And I said, no. I said, I'm not getting divorced. I don't believe in divorce. He said, well, that's stupid because sometimes people don't always get along. But it's that black and white approach, this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. I was very rigid. And even in our life, I was very rigid. This is what you do, this is what you don't do. But I finally made the decision to go to school, and I went to the local community college. And, long story short, I ended up enrolling in taking some core classes and enrolling in a nuclear medicine program. So took classes there. My first semester, I had an excellent teacher who, in math, I took a remedial math class. I knew I was bad at it. And I had a great teacher who really believed in me and really helped me. And I was very successful. And that gave me the confidence to realize that I could be successful. So it's all comes down to an excellent teacher. And so I went through that, ended up switching to the nursing program, got my associate degree. And life really started changing for us because I had a good job. And we ended up moving back up to where we live now, which is my wife's hometown, which is still within half an hour of where we're living. And things really started to change for us. But I still had that mindset. I still had this belief in the doctrine that I still felt like I was doing something wrong, but I wouldn't talk to anybody. So I started really examining some of my thoughts, and then I started saying, well, maybe this isn't really all right, but God is real. God is right. So I started kind of considering myself an agnostic. And I really started looking at religion in general and looking at the Bible and looking at doctrines, not just Jehovah's Witnesses, looking at things. And by this point, through my education, I learned how to study. I learned how to research things. And I was able to get to the point where I felt where I could really start to question things, and analyze things and think critically about things, and not realizing that, you can actually think about something and question something. And we were always taught that, the truth will always be the truth, and it can stand up to any scrutiny. Well, it doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. The emphasis in that statement is wrong. You say the truth can stand up to any scrutiny, but it should be it can't stand up to any scrutiny. As soon as you start looking at this, man, this stuff is wrong. And I was like, this is a bunch of crap. Because I've been thinking since I first started going back to the hall, I started thinking, well, that lasted for a few months. I was saying, oh, these people are dumb. They don't really know what they're talking about, but everything else is right. It's an imperfect organization. It's a perfect organization run by imperfect people. That's what everybody says. No, it's not.
Because that's what
It's a
everybody's
bunch
been
of
told
crap.
to say. Yes.
Yeah, it's a bunch of crap, man.
Well, they all say the same thing.
Yeah, it's all a bunch of crap. It's all a bunch of, and I started, man, these people are brainwashed. I started learning some things about psychology and sociology. Man, this stuff is a bunch of crap. And then that kind of, after, some analysis, I ended up starting to, I actually kind of landed that, I started saying for a long time I was agnostic, and that was really me just not wanting to commit that I thought it was a bunch of crap. So, at this point now, I guess if I identify anything, I'm very much an atheist. And that all kind of came crashing down, but that was still really hard for me. It's hard for me to admit that. And as my wife and I really started getting our lives together and really started building a life and started thinking about having a kid and stuff like that, our lives are going pretty good at this point. I'm got a good job. I'm working in the hospitals. I'm making pretty good money. Enough that we can live on comfortably. We're not scraping by every penny. Our lives are getting pretty good. And I realized I need to start working on myself. By this point, professionally, I'm being pretty successful. I'd gone back and got my bachelor's degree and was getting ready to start my master's degree. And, but I still wasn't happy. And that's where the introspection started to take place. So I was like, why am I not happy? I've got all this good stuff. I've got a good wife. I've got a house. I've got all the things. On the outside, I'm putting before this performance that I'm happy, but I'm still miserable. At this point, I cut back on drinking. I essentially stopped drinking. I'd done all these good things, but I'm miserable, and I don't know why. I should be so happy. And after my daughter was born, especially, I started thinking, I need to build a good life for her, and I want her to be happy. But how the hell can I teach somebody else to be happy when I hate myself?
Mm-hmm.
So I really
Happiness is
put
an inside
myself.
game, isn't it?
It is. So I really started putting myself under a microscope. Intellectually, I know all these things at this point. I know that this isn't true intellectually. I know I can look at anybody else. I know the psychology. I know this stuff, but I never looked at myself. So, I started really looking at myself, and I've still, I would still talk to my parents occasionally, especially when my daughter was born. We started communicating more, because they wanted to be part, and I wanted them to be a part of her life because my grandparents were a big part of my life growing up. But I was still so deferential to anything they wanted to do, because I was still ashamed. And
Like you
I
don't deserve to be able to say anything that's not differential.
well, I don't deserve, and I kind of thought internally, I didn't realize time, but I thought I didn't deserve to be happy.
Sure, be happy, have respect, blah blah blah.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And respect's a big thing. I didn't respect myself, not as a person. And I was still trying to always, in all my interactions, be who I thought other people wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I started to realize I didn't know who the hell I was. And I really started looking into this. But I still, at this point, all this time, I never talked to my wife about my feelings. I never talked to anybody about anything, about any of my feelings. I never opened up to anybody. And I was never vulnerable to anybody. And I wasn't even vulnerable to myself. So I felt like I was going through life and I was doing all the motions. I'm checking the boxes. I'm treating everything like a checklist. I went back to school. I found out I could be successful. I was successful. I graduate with honors, straight A's all the way through college. Um, on the outside, I looked like, this guy's got all of his crap together. I didn't have any of it together.
But
Not the
you
stuff
had the appearance, right? And that's what
I
we
had,
were
but I
taught to
had the
have,
appearance.
the
I
appearance.
had the
Yeah.
appearance. And that was so important to me. So like at work, when I'm talking to different people, I'm acting like I think they want me to act. And my social life was very limited. It was my wife and her family, and that was it. I still didn't have any friends. But I still would act the way I thought they wanted me to see. I wouldn't even ask my wife about what she thought about anything. I would decide. And some of that may come from from all the uh, um, I still have the thought of, like, I'm the head of the household. I'm the man. I have to make all the decisions and I have to do everything. I
Well, the
still had all the
rigidity
thinking.
of a JW. I mean, it's
Yeah,
black and white,
at
right
this
and wrong.
point, I said I didn't believe the doctrine, but I still had all the mannerisms of it.
Mhm.
I was very judgmental. Everything was still black and white, and I was most judgmental to myself. And I wouldn't face anything that was difficult, not anything that really mattered. Yeah, I would go to school and I would take a test and I would study for that, but I wouldn't face anything emotionally about myself. And what really got me to start to do that was my daughter. So after she was born, it really changed my perspective on things that, I've got to be here for her. I was still depressed. I was still hard on myself about everything. I still thought I had screwed everything up in my life, even though I had all these successes. I still hated myself. I did not like myself at all, but I loved her. And, I love my wife and, I love her family, but I still didn't know what it was to really love. Everything was still transactional. Everything was still judgment based. I love her, but she'll only love me if I do this, or they'll only love me if I do this. People only care about me if I do this. People will only respect me if I do this. If I'm not doing this for them, I'm not worthy of their attention. But my daughter changed that for me. And not at first. I love her more than anything in the world, but it really got me to look at things with my parents too. And it really got me to take a step back and say, you know what? My parents were raised in all this too. My parents were, good parents. They really tried to put me first. And they only know what they were taught. But at some point, how the hell do you not talk to your damn kid for 6 years who lives 20 minutes away? What the hell is wrong with you? Do you really need a book and a person and people in New York and all these people to tell you that you should give a damn about your kid? Because I don't need somebody to tell me that. I'm an atheist now. I don't go to meetings. I don't read these magazines. I don't read the Bible. I've read the Bible cover to cover probably 6 times. I know what it says. I don't need that to tell me to be a decent human and to care about my kid. And so I started to reevaluate all this stuff. I started to reevaluate what little relationship I have with my parents. And I realized, man, this is messed up. This is not good. I do talk to my parents more. I still don't talk to them very much. My daughter is 8, and they have seen her probably 12 times. I will not, and I made this very clear to them after a certain point. I started to put my foot down with our relationship with my parents. I told them they will never be alone with her. About a year ago, a little over a year ago now, I did take my daughter to visit them. It's the last time I took her to visit them. And I had a conversation with my dad, and he started talking about the congregation and the way things are in the meetings. We started talking about the quick builds and stuff like this, and then he started talking about, well, that's changed. And at this point, I've been looking critically at the organization, and I've gotten to know a little bit more what to do. Of course, I've never told my dad I look at the apostate material,
Sure.
but I knew more about it, but I didn't let on I knew how things were going. And we started talking, and he started talking about all this stuff, and I finally told my dad, this is last November. I told him, I said, you know what? I don't believe any of this. He said, well, what about the organization? I said, no, it's not the organization. And then he pulled the same thing. Well, it's a perfect organization run by imperfect people. Yada, yada, yada.
So
And I
are
told
all
him, I
of
said, no,
them.
yeah. I said,
If you want
I
to,
said,
if you want
I
to,
said, no, Dad,
you'd
you
say
don't
the
get it. I
same.
don't believe in any of this stuff. I said, I don't believe in Jesus.
Sure.
He's like, what? And I don't believe in God. And it floored him. But I stood up to my dad. I was 45 years old at the time. No, I was 44. I was going to turn 45 years old. And for the first time in my life, I said to my dad that I think this is all a bunch of bullshit. And I think it's wrong. And I think it's evil. And I told of course, he pulled this whole thing. Well, what are you going to say to your wife and your daughter when the great tribulation comes and you rise home and they look at you and they say, you knew, why didn't you save us? And I
Gosh,
looked at
that's so
my dad.
manipulative.
Oh,
Wow.
oh yeah. Oh, he's laying it on so thick. Every time I would
Wow.
talk to my dad, we would always come back to this stuff and he would just lay it on. And it's just regurgitating all the crap. And he would just always lay it on, and I would take it before.
Yeah, that's like
And I
using your kid and your wife against, like,
yeah,
that's horrible.
he's weaponizing all this stuff.
Yeah, weaponize your relationships.
But he would do this, and I would always sit and take it. And I looked at my dad, I said, you know what? I said, if I'm wrong, because I don't know. I said, but if I'm wrong and everything you believe is right, and great tribulation comes and Jesus comes down on a white horse with a sword and there's fire and everything falling from the sky and they look at me and they say what doing and Jehovah opens up the heavens and he's right there in front of me and I can see him and he tells me that I'm going to be dead forever because I didn't serve him and I'm starting to speak against him and I think he's wrong. He's getting two middle fingers and I say, good, kill me because I don't want to serve you because you're evil, you're manipulative, and you're cruel.
Yes, sir.
And I don't want it. I might be wrong. I don't know. No one knows. But even if I'm wrong, I don't want any part of it because
I
it's
happily go
horrible.
down with that ship.
I will go down with that ship. Scream. Two middle fingers up and screaming at him, holding my family
He doesn't
because
deserve
I
this.
don't want to live. I don't want to live in that new system.
Oh,
I don't want my kid living there. I don't want to spend eternity bowing and scraping to some petty, mentally ill, omniscient being. No, I hate it, man. I hate every bit about this organization, and I hate all of it. And it's because it's horrible the things they do to people. Because I see my parents who did try and be good parents, and I still think my parents at the core have always tried to do what they think is right. And I
sure.
think when they shun me now, that they still do it. They're still doing it because they think it's right. Because they've been told it's right all their lives. At some point, you're just like they say, you're ultimately responsible for your actions, though, because
Absolutely.
because you're taught that what you're doing is right, and you're taught that you're doing all these things because it's what you're supposed to do. But at some point, why do you have to serve this evil God that you're serving? Because at some point you're a thinking person. Why can't you turn your brain and realize that your kids should matter more? Do you really want to live in this system for eternity on earth, being a petty servant of a God, but not have your kid there because I smoked a cigarette? Now, and I do think, back to my parents, with losing my daughter or their daughter at a young age, before I was born,
Sure.
that was traumatic for them. And I know that they've kind of held on to that. And that's one of the things and because all their parents have passed now. And I know they look back on that and they have that resurrection hope because they want to see their family again. And they want to hold their baby girl again that they only got to hold for a day. And I get that. But the fact this organization would weaponize that grief and put it against them and that they're willing to yes, it's a tragedy their daughter died. And, again, as a parent, it's your biggest fear. But, dude, I'm here. I've been here for
I was saying they
46
didn't have a
years.
choice in the first one. They have a choice in this one.
Yeah. I've been here for 46 years. I got this fellowship when I was 21 years old. I've been out longer than I was in. My parents don't know me. They know the child me. They've never tried to have the opportunity to get to know me.
No.
Well, I don't agree with them on religion. And I've done some bad things, some very self-destructive things. I think overall, I try to be a pretty good person now. I don't drink anymore. Very rarely will I have a drink, and if I do, I don't get drunk. I've not been drunk in years. I've gotten over that. I still consider myself an alcoholic because I don't think that ever really goes away. But I know if I drink to a certain point, if I have one more, I will drink, and I don't let myself get to that. I can sit. I've gotten to the point now. I went for quite a while with ever touching alcohol, and I'm at the point now where I can have a beer without it consuming my thoughts. It took a long time to get there, and I rarely have. I mean, I haven't had a beer in 3, 4 months. Just haven't.
And you don't have to justify any of that anyway. I mean, I'd
Yeah,
rather, what I'm saying? Like, I'd rather hang out with somebody who did some bad things, whatever, some very human things, than somebody who shuns their kid.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I was an alcoholic because I hated myself and I was so depressed and I had no hope at
Sure,
all.
because that's what you were taught.
So I did fall into that. I
Sure.
did fall into alcoholism because of that.
You took accountability and responsibility, and you didn't just say, well, it's all their fault. Sure, they created this monster, but it's up to me to fix it, right? Like, I'm the one who has to change.
Yeah,
I do have some ability to change. That's why we can't just say that witnesses are just these poor cult victims who have zero accountability. No, no,
it's
you can
not.
see their accountability by how they treat their shunned kids, because some of them still have relationship with their shunned kids and value that above the society's rules, and others are like, nah, man, I'm gonna go right by the book and kick my
Yeah.
kid to the curb.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing, you can't you do have to have a justification. You can't justify you being an evil person just because of what some men told you.
Sure.
At some point, I do think my parents love me, but only as well as they know how, because I don't think they
There
know what it
you
is to
go.
love. They don't know what it is to love their kid. And
That's
I
right.
came to this realization not too long ago. It just struck me one day. I was at the gas station getting gas, and this just hit me. These little things start popping up now that I've started to look at these things. You know, if if somebody came up to me and my daughter, and we were walking down the street with a gun, I would push my daughter behind me, tell her to run, and I would do everything I could to save myself. I'd try and disarm him. I would do everything I could. I don't want to die anymore. Um, but she's my priority. I will jump in front. Like, I will take that gun, I will shove it in my mouth so he can't aim it at her. I absolutely will do that. No questions asked. I don't want to die. I want to be here for her and I want to be here to live now. But she's my priority. I will die for her if I have to. My dad would push me in front of him and he'd fucking run. Sorry about that.
100%.
But Um, yeah, he would, because that's what he's done.
Yeah.
And when that hit me, man, that broke my heart. That my dad, this man who I have always put on a pedestal, who I think has done his best,
Sure.
would would let me die to save his own butt.
Yep.
And
Spend it all.
that's hard. And but I'll tell you, when I came to that realization, I got some peace from that. That, you know what? It's not my fault.
No.
It's not my fault that he feels this way. It's not my fault that I can't live that life he wants me to live. And that was one of the biggest realizations. And all this came when I finally, about 2 years ago, I started to actually take myself out and look at myself. I was like, I want to be happy, and I want to be here and available for my family. I want to be emotionally available. I don't just want to go to work and pay the bills. And I realized I finally acknowledged that I was miserable, and I still hated myself. I didn't like myself because I didn't, but I started, I don't even know who I am.
Right. Now you can be here for yourself too as you get to
Yeah.
know yourself, right?
And it's been a great experience. I started going to therapy. I did some therapy online, just because with schedules, it's so hard to find anybody. And that was good. I did that for about 6 months. I had a really good therapist who we really talked about how these fundamental ideas you establish build your personality. She kind of, we talked about, your personality is built by the time you're 10, and it's so hard to break out of those molds. And it's funny because I knew all this stuff. I'd taken psychology classes.
Sure.
I work in healthcare now. I go to work every day and I do everything I can to save lives. I know that through my career, there have been times when I've been in situations where I had to do my job right, and people are alive because of that. Not saying somebody else couldn't have done the same thing, but I work to really help people, and I work to really help improve people's quality of life. And that's what I do every day. And I try and be an asset to my community. There's a local food bank I work for. I donate time and money to these things. I donate materials to these things. I really want to help build my community and support people and be a good person. But being a good person means being active and helping people get through things that they need help. It doesn't mean giving somebody a magazine and then walking away. That's not helping people. When
And
somebody,
people who are not doing well can't help other people.
yeah,
So
and
who are
exactly
Jehovah's
that's
Witnesses ever going to be able to help?
they can't. They don't have the tools, but they think they do. But they don't help anybody with any of this crap. I mean, I'm not saying everybody has had a horrible experience, and there's some people who found some personal peace or whatever, but it's all fake. None of it's real. And when I did that therapy for a while, it was good. The therapist was excellent, really helped me look at some stuff. Ultimately, I stopped doing it because I spent most of my time explaining to her about Jehovah's Witnesses
Sure.
because she didn't understand that side of it. She'd never been exposed to it. She was a great therapist. But honestly, most of our sessions were me just telling her about the meetings. So I kind of stopped. But I found a lot of peace and acknowledgement. I joined a couple Facebook groups, hearing people's stories. That's how I found this podcast. A couple years ago, really started listening to that. Man, I love listening to people's stories. A couple other podcasts I listened to um, that have really helped me. Some of them are kind of. I just recently started listening to some that really start breaking down the doctrine. Some of it has still been really triggering for me, and I've kind of gotten to the point where that doesn't trigger me so much. Because I'm moving past it, because I'm growing from it. Uh, Listening to this podcast has been so big for me because even though the details of stories are so different, um, I get something out of everyone, and hearing people's stories has really helped me look at, you know what, I'm not alone. I'm not just one big screw up. I didn't break everything, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this because, well, my story is different from so many others. It's also the same. One of the stories I think I like the most are the ones that are not from XJWs because I realize that's not just this cult mentality is so destructive. But I love hearing the similarities in the stories. I love hearing the differences. I love and I just love hearing about people's lives. I mean, I've become much more empathetic. I think I've become much more kind. I don't see everything in black and white anymore. I don't immediately judge things. And that's something that has been so hard for me to move past because I realize that how destructive that thought process is to me. I empathize with people now. And a lot of that's come through my career too. I've met so many different people from so many different backgrounds and so many different walks of life. I've seen people at their very worst days. I mean, the very, very worst you can think of. I've held people's hands as they're dying, complete strangers. I've been an active participant trying to stop somebody's death while they die. And I've been the person to help clean up the body and then go get their families. And hold people while they look at their dad who suddenly died, and hold them in that time and be there for them. And it's very powerful, because it's really let me see that my way of looking at the world is not everything. And I don't know what's right for everybody. I can't sit here and say, well, you decide that you love someone who is of a similar or same gender as you. Doesn't make you evil. Maybe it's not my life choice, but that's fine. You can still be a valued person. You may smoke cigarettes. I quit smoking when I was 26. I smoked for 20 years. So my big sin, and I told my parents that I quit smoking a long time ago, and my mom was like, "Oh, you could write a letter, and we could be a family again." It's like, and I was like, "But Mom, I don't believe this. You really want me to lie just so we can be a family?" She did,
Yeah, they absolutely do.
but that's not being a family. I don't commit any of the sins that I was disfellowshipped for,
Yeah,
other
they're
than being
based
an
on
atheist.
lies.
I'm being an atheist, and I speak up against the cult. And
Sure,
I tell everybody I know, "Oh yeah, I was raised in a cult. Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult." I tell them about it. I don't care.
sure.
I don't do a lot of very vocal advocacy because I do still live close to my parents. I don't want to put them in a bad position. But I've gotten to the point, but I do speak out against it to anybody. I tell, "Oh yeah,
Okay,
this is a cult.
somebody's
This is
not being
horrible."
very deferential today.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm not. No, I'm not deferent to my parents. And we actually, like I say, that time I didn't talk to my parents for about 6 months after that time. I told my dad that. Um, my I do speak to my parents very rarely now.
Yeah.
Um, and I have seen them a couple times since then, but still it's very, very limited. But that's a big reason. I'm not out there. They have the convention in my town, and I really thought, man, I saw they were having, man, I really wanted to go down there with a sign. I wanted to be that guy, but my parents are going to be at that convention, and there's people who know me who are at that convention who would recognize me.
Mhm.
They may not now because they haven't seen me in over 20 years, and I've got a beard, and I've lost most of my hair, and I'm old and fat now, but they don't.
I don't know. I protested the convention last year where my family went. People noticed me, so
But
I'm
I don't
different
want.
now. But they knew who I
Yeah,
was.
yeah. Oh, I'm sure they would recognize me. Um, but I don't want to. I don't want to put my parents in that position,
Sure.
because I do still have a little bit of a relationship with them. It's very different, and it's really more centered around my daughter. But I will not let my daughter go over there with unattended. My dad asked me after she was born. She was, before she was 1. He asked me one time if they could take her to a meeting. And they want their grandparents. It's the only grandchild they're going to have. I'm an only child. They wanted to show their friends their grandchild. I get that, but I sure as hell can't come there.
But man, it
If I
takes some.
walk
I
in
mean,
there,
yes, but it also takes some balls to ask your kid, "Can I
will
take your
you?
kid to the thing that has wrecked your life and is the reason we don't talk
Exactly,
anymore?" What the
exactly.
heck?
I'm not letting her anywhere near that damn place. I'll take her to a Catholic church. We'll take her there. I
Sure.
didn't tell him that, but I wanted to.
Yeah. Let's go out in the
Um,
hollers and handle some snakes. Let's do
yeah,
anything before I go there.
yeah. But you know what? I said no. I'm not comfortable with that. But that was still when I was pretty differential to them.
Sure.
But I really wanted to say, hell no, she's not taking her anywhere. One, she's not going anywhere without out of my sight with you, because I don't trust you.
Mhm.
And because I know how Jehovah's Witnesses are now, I've come to accept that I know this. And well, I don't think my parents would really ever do anything. I can see them trying to save her
Oh, of
from me.
course.
And at that point, she was an infant. She is never going to be old enough. She would never understand what was going on. And I don't think she would come to any physical harm. And I understand they wanted to show their friends their grandchild. I get that.
But that's how it starts.
Exactly. And you know what? If I carried her in there, would anybody look at me? Many people wouldn't piss on me if I was on fire.
Nope.
So why the hell am I going to put my child in that environment? Sure, all these people would, oh, ooh, and ah, look at this beautiful baby. Sure, whatever. She was an infant. Who cares? But then, oh, can she come to memorial with us?
Mhm.
This is important to us. You know how important this day is.
Sure.
Or then she gets a little bit older and they want her to come over there. I will not let her go to their house. I will not let her out of my sight around them because I don't trust what they tell her.
Of course.
Because I don't want her to see a Bible story book. That book was horrible. I mean, I was raised on that book. I'm 2, 3 years old. My parents were reading me through. I'm looking at these pictures of people dying. I knew about murder. I knew about violence. I knew about destruction. I knew what a harlot was before I went to kindergarten. That's
Raised,
not right.
raised like that, yeah.
That is not right. You shouldn't know this stuff. You shouldn't be seeing this stuff. I shouldn't see a picture of a dude dead on the ground with his brother running away from him when I'm 3. I know it's a drawing, but I shouldn't see a lady holding a baby on a rock in the flood with a woolly mammoth squealing on it. I mean, I still see. I haven't seen that book in years. I can still see all these pictures. I can see Jezebel sitting in the window.
Yep.
You know,
Absolutely.
that's not stuff you show a little kid. That's not stories a little kid should know. I mean, the
No, but
Bible
what are
is
they
full
gonna
of
say
all of these.
about her dad and things like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, and then they would say, well, if I were to let her go over there, and they do start teaching a little bit. Well, my dad's not Jehovah's Witness. What's going to happen? Well, your dad's going to die, honey.
Mhm. Oh, they'd absolutely tell a child that.
Hell yeah, they would to scare her.
Happens all the time.
Yeah. No, not letting them around her, and that's one of the reasons we don't talk as much because I won't let them have free access to her.
Well, again, is the it was just really sad if the relationship is just about your kid when you're their son.
Yeah, they don't care about me.
That's
If it wasn't for her, we still wouldn't talk.
so
We talked
what's really there? That's sad. But
We
that's
talked like 4 times until I told him that my wife was pregnant. From 21, we talked
judgment
4
doesn't
or
always
5
come around
times.
when you have a kid.
Yeah, and they were
Look,
there when she was born, and I was happy to have them there.
sure.
And they held her in the hospital, and about a month later, they came over to see her, and then I sent them an invitation to her first birthday party, and I knew they wouldn't come. We were just having a little thing in the house, and I told them in there, "Hey, I know it's a birthday party. I know you don't do this, but we're just going to get a few people around here celebrating her life. Nobody's gonna expect you to sing happy birthday. You don't have to eat any cake. I'm just giving you the opportunity because I don't want to speak for you." And they said no. And I got this letter back. They were so offended. I sent them this birthday card, this birthday invitation.
You're a
And I told
monster,
them,
Alex.
yeah.
Just an
Well, then afterward,
absolute
I
monster.
talked to my mom a little about that. When I started looking at this stuff, I brought that up. I said I never sent them another one. So I'm not going to be rude and shove it in your face. I told my mom, I said, stop mailing me the invitation to memorial every year
Yeah.
because she would mail that to me every year. I said, stop sending me that. I don't want to go. You don't want an invitation to a birthday party? I don't want an invitation to that. And it stopped.
So, this is the sad reality in the end is that you grow up even with two parents who care and who show that they care and who are trying. But at the end of the day, there's this thing that's going to be in the way, and it's in the way because they allow it to be in the way. It's not 100% just it, and it's a shame because it utterly separates and destroys families. But the good news is, out of all of this has come an Alex who has worked on himself and who has done a lot to get to know himself and to give yourself a chance to right the wrongs of the past and to find yourself and to find who you are as a dad and a husband and a friend and just your own individual self. Good for you. And that means you can
Yeah.
have a good life today.
Yeah, and that's really what I'm trying to do because I finally started to realize that I can't be what she needs me to be and what my wife needs me to be without taking care of myself.
Sure.
And I am very fortunate. Well, I don't have my family. Um, I have my wife's family who have taken me right in. I mean, I call her parents mom and dad. I have that type of relationship with them. She has two brothers. I've got a whole slew of nephews and a couple nieces, and I have a family now. But I only have really started to appreciate that since I started looking at this stuff. And I'm still, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not there.
Right.
I am,
But you
I am
have to
working.
look at it. It's hard to look at, but you have to do the hard things if you want something better.
It is, and it has gotten a lot better. And I still have days where it gets hard, and I still have days when things just hit me, especially things about like my parents. Um, I still really struggle with some of those things. Every once in a while, it just hits me. I lose like, man, my parents don't love me like a parent should, and that hurts, man.
Yeah, it does hurt. They
But
can't love you like a parent should because they don't know
they
what it
can't.
is,
They
but it
can't.
still sucks that you didn't get that. You can
Yeah,
hold both things.
they can't, and they won't.
Mm-mm.
But you know what? I've got my wife's family, and I'm finally starting to get me. And it's like I say, I'm not there. I'm still working on it all, every day.
Sure.
But I've started talking to my wife about how I feel about things, which I just started doing that about a year ago. We've been married for 18 years. Uh, and I just don't I just finally started doing that stuff. And I've started talking to people. I've started trying as I'm starting to figure out who I am, I've started to be myself. As I figure out who I am, I'm starting to let that come through my personality, and I'm actually starting to have some friends for the first time. And it's funny, I recently reconnected with someone who I grew up with. The boy who's in my grandparents' congregation, he found me and he called me and left me a voicemail and said who he was and said he tracked me down. He really liked to talk to me. I haven't talked to this guy since I was 14, but I always still thought about him because he was really he's the only friend I had in the organization and one of maybe two friends I had growing up when I was young. Really always really liked this guy and thought about him a lot, but I never did anything because I'm just fellowshipped. And he reached out to me and said, hey, if you want to call me back, here's my number. And I talked to my wife about I was really torn. I didn't know anything about where he was at in life or anything. I mean, I was disfellowshipped years after I moved away. I didn't know how much he knew or anything. And I said, you know what? My wife actually said, do you want to talk to him? I said, yeah, I do. So I called him, and the first thing he said, I don't know where you are with the witnesses now. I said, well, I was disfellowshipped and I'm still not a part of it. He said, well, I'm not in it anymore either. So I want to lead with that. And my wife was sitting right next to me in the room, and I said, "Oh, thank F." Right aloud. It was a big relief. Just I was so tense, I was so scared to call him, but I really did want to find out how he was. I
Sure.
still care about this guy, and he's not. He hasn't officially left, so I don't want to say anything any more about him. But he's not part of it anymore. He's not attending meetings anymore. And we talked for 2 hours, and we still talk all the time. We talked last night. We either message each other, we talk. We may go a week without talking to each other because we're adults and we're busy and we have lives. But we still stay in touch. I still think about the guy every day. Man, he is my best friend. Absolutely. And it's funny. We started talking. Man, we just fell right back into that. like with no hesitation. We fell right back into the close friendship we had when we were kids. And that's how I know he really was a real friend. Because we like all the same stuff. We still like all the same stuff. We still do the same stuff. We like the same stuff. We read the same stuff. We we are a perfect match, for a friendship because we have so many similar interests. We have similar backgrounds. We've talked a lot about that in some of his things that he's been dealing with, and we talk a lot about that. It's so nice to have somebody to talk to that really gets it, And you and I have been working together for a little while now, and that's what's been that's why it's been so much better for me personally than the therapist I was seeing before because I don't have to explain everything. And that's something that I encourage everyone to seek professional help, whether that's a therapist, a counselor, a doctor, someone who understands this stuff. And you have to find what meshes for you because you're going to click with different people.
Of course.
So it doesn't matter who you talk to. It doesn't have to be someone who has a title doctor. It doesn't have to be a person who even is officially professional in these kind of things. You have to find someone to talk to who you can kind of click with.
If you're feeling stuck in your life after cult involvement and can't find the life you want, leaving a cult is a new beginning on a path to healing, not some magical end itself that is healing. Relief from the immediate pain feels good at first, but that's not necessarily true happiness. The feelings of social awkwardness and isolation, lack of self worth, perfectionism, patterns of being attracted to emotionally unavailable people, not even knowing who you are yourself, all of these things and more are lingering effects of that environment. Being in a cult isn't just following a doctrine, but it's following a culture, a way of life, a way of being that doesn't just go away because you stopped attending meetings. If you want to shortcut the path to healing instead of trying to figure it out on your own, maybe even work with me professionally in my cult recovery coaching practice, you can find opportunities to do that and also for other cool resources at my website, exjwhelp.com. That's exjwhelp.com.
But it doesn't mean that everything has to be all the same. And that goes back to the whole JW thinking. These are your friends in the congregation, and they have to be your friends, and they are your friends because you are the same, and you have to be the same with them, and you have to understand the same things as they do. You don't have to do that. You can still be friends with somebody or get along with somebody, or talk to somebody, even if you don't like all the same things. I
One
think
of
I
my
think working
favorite
with you has been very beneficial because you do get it. You understand what's going on up here because you've lived part of that. Some people may find that with a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Some people may find that with just a friend. It doesn't matter. But working with you has been very beneficial just to put things in perspective. And talking to my friend has been so good for me
And
because
I love seeing you find that friend again, and just all these, like, I love seeing people make friends, right? Like, you were just this
this is
sweet
the
kid
first
who
friend.
wanted friends. You should
This
have
is the
friends.
first friend I've had since I stopped talking to him.
Yeah,
The first real friend. I mean, my wife is my best friend.
sure.
But honestly, I haven't started opening up about what my inner thoughts and things with her until just a couple years ago.
We're not taught that it's safe to do so. So
Yeah, it
we're
wasn't
running
safe.
from everything. We're not looking at it. We're trying to run
No,
from it all.
I would run from all my problems. It
Of
put me
course.
in very difficult positions. When I went through the big period of depression and alcoholism and stuff like that, trying to run away. Got through that, but I was still running away. I was running away through work. I was running away from this. I was running away from that. And I'm finally looking at myself and figuring out who I am and trying to figure out what makes me happy because I don't know. So I was finally starting to reach out and try new things and I make myself vulnerable with people. And if they don't like part of what I'm doing, that's okay.
Hmm.
I'm talking to people at work. I'm making some friends with some people at work. Never done that before because I've always tried to be who who I think they want me to be. Not even they've never said this, but I've put that out there. And I'm starting to make friends. Now, I don't have a bunch of them. I'm busy. I'm a dad. I've got work. I've got a family,
Or as you're an adult,
It is.
other
You're not going to have,
time constraints.
I'm not going to have 20 or 30 friends. And honestly, I don't want that, man. That's exhausting because,
Well,
well, I
no
do want to be
introvert is like,
social.
hey, I want
No,
30 close
no,
friends.
I don't. I don't. And like I said, my social battery is very low and I will do stuff. And after a couple hours, man, I'm done. I don't want to go out and do this stuff. I need to recharge. But I have somebody I can talk to, and I can pick up the phone right now when we're talking. I can message and I can call him, and he will answer, and we will talk for an hour if I need anything. And he's contacted me when he's had things going on. Hey, man, I'm not doing good with this today, and we'll talk. But we also just send each other memes and do talk about a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter too, you
Sure.
know. But it's so good. It's just having a friend. So, I mean, anybody who's out there going through this stuff and struggling with this stuff and feeling so alone, you don't have to be alone. There are people out there for you, whether those are new friends or reconnecting with old friends or finding something new. There's people out there. There's so many great people in this world. There's so many kind people. It's not what we were taught. And I
No,
did that even for years, even when I was living in it, I approached it that way.
and you're one of them too, right? So that's one of the things that I love the most about what I do in my coaching practice is over time, I get to see people who start to feel themselves and start to like themselves and figure out who they are. And then I get to see them be appreciated by other people who, as they start to make friends or whatever the case may be, who actually appreciate you for you. And
Yeah,
so I love seeing Alex, you, or anybody, right, who has made a friend or is just being themselves at work and goofing off or whatever, and somebody's like, "Ooh, that I like that." I
yeah,
love seeing people be appreciated. We should all be appreciated for who we are.
we should, and we really should, and everybody can be, and everybody should be.
Yep,
And if you're around
everybody
people in your
deserves
life
it.
that don't, you don't need them in your life. It's not worth it.
Nope.
This is a short life. This is what we've got. There may be more. I don't know. I don't think there is. But even if there is, it doesn't matter.
If there
You
is, I
need
still
to
want to
be
make this one the best it can be.
exactly,
Why would
and
I
being the
not?
best. And being the best doesn't mean you have to be the greatest at everything. It's okay to not be
Oh,
good at something.
sure.
I like, I'll be doing something I'm not the best at it. I don't care. I'm enjoying myself.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you're doing. You can be out playing basketball with your friends. Doesn't You don't have to be NBA quality to have fun doing that.
No. I'll
It's
draw you a
okay.
star right now on this piece of paper, and you can see how terrible I am.
Yeah, I
Any
can't
kind of
draw. I
artistry, I'm a mess. That's okay.
Yeah, and it's like with music, I always had to be the best. But I want to be perceived as the best. I wouldn't also the stuff I didn't want to do. I didn't want to practice and do all this stuff, but I still want everybody to think I was the best. So I kept striving for those things. Now I have a guitar sitting over there I bought myself as a present for finishing my master's degree. I barely pick it up. I'm not good at it. It's terrible. But I like to play with it sometimes, and that's okay.
Well, back early on in the conversation, you were talking about how growing up just as a kid, right? You're taught that, or that you kind of picked up this thing like you're the best, right? You're kind of like a little more mature, and people are singing your praises for that kind of stuff, right? We're kind of taught to be the best that is Jehovah's servants, or maybe just as a kid in the kingdom hall, you're like the best kid, right? Or
Yeah,
the best young servant of Jehovah. You're just kind of given this identity at times, and then it creates this pressure to live up to that you have to be always the best at whatever you are. That's how you get praise, and that's also how you avoid the punishment, right? Or
yeah,
being looked down on. So I
mhm,
think a lot of us took that away. Again, perfectionism is present in most people that I work with in my practice, because myself included, that I had to work through as well, because that's where it comes from.
Yeah, and as you always led me to point like now, like at work, I do have a successful career. I think I've done well for myself. Um, but now I've got the point, I would always be the person, if anything needed done, I'm doing it, I'm doing it, I'm doing it, I'll do it. My department administrator at work, when something needs to be done, if I volunteer for something, she stops me and she says, "No, can you really do this? Do you really want to do this? Well, how is this going to impact you? You don't have to say yes. And if you are going to say yes, there needs to be some caveats. We need to take something else away from you because I still do have that drive to be seen as the best.
Sure.
But I've kind of changed my approach toward that. I don't care if my coworkers see me as the best. I care that my patients do well. So if it is going to impact that, I don't always say yes to things. And she won't let me say yes to things because she knows how I am. Because she cares about me and she doesn't want me to overdo it. Doesn't want me killing myself working from home all the time and doing all that stuff. She won't let me do it. And she's told me that. I'm not going to let you do this, even though you say you'll do it, even though it needs done, because you don't have time. You need to go home. And and I've started to realize that, okay, it's okay to not be seen as the yes man. It's okay to not be the best at all this stuff. It's okay just to try my best.
Well, instead, you're actually being valued for who you are in total, not that you will always say yes.
Yeah, and that's been strange for me. And I'm very fortunate that I do have a really good professional relationship, and I work in an environment where everyone, even our leadership teams, even our chairman of our department, they value the people there. I have a great place I work, a really, really positive environment. And yes, we have things we have to do. Things have to get done. But they really care about you, whether you're in the headspace where you're caring about yourself or not. And I've learned from that. And I
Yes.
take that approach with the people who work with me. I won't let them do this. If the weather's made bad, some people they work kind of, you're not allowed to come in today. It's too dangerous. You will stay home. They say, "Oh, my kids have this thing. I'm going to request this off." You are going, and you're not going to leave and go to your kids' thing at school and come back. You're going to go and then take them home and take them out to lunch. I don't care because you have to take care of yourself too.
That's really valuing people.
It is because I do value those people and I do appreciate the things they do. And yes, there's a job that needs to be done,
Of course.
but you can still do that and still take care of people.
So, what's valuable in your life today? What do you have? What's good in Alex's world after all of this?
A lot. Um, my family, first and foremost. My wife and our relationship has gotten a ton better since we've actually talked, and she's been more open up and be vulnerable with me because I realize now I'm more approachable because I'm not just going to, when she comes to me with something, say, "Well, this is how it's going to be done. This is how you're going to do it. This is how you're going to do it." I can just talk to her. I can be approachable. I can be kind because I wasn't very kind. I mean, I always cared about her, but if she would come to me and say something was, you know, bothering her, this or that, I would just shut it down with a solution. And I wouldn't even think about it. I wouldn't think about her perspective or anything else.
Yeah,
I
there's
don't do that
feelings behind
anymore.
all that.
It's not right or wrong. This is how it's done. This is how it's done. We talk more. And she appreciates that I am more open. And I think that she feels more valued because I do show now that I do value her opinion and I just want to talk to her. Our relationship has gotten so much better. Not that it was really bad before, but it was a little distant.
Sure.
And so that has gotten great. My relationship with my daughter is great. We're very close. She's 8 going on 16 and she's got the sass for it, but we also we share a lot of things in common. And sometimes I have to stop myself because I get a little short with things, and sometimes I'm having a bad day where I'm being hard on things and I'm not the best person to be around. But she's a wonderful person. My wife and I both agree. We don't care what she does as long as she's kind and she's a good person. And we try and instill that with her. My wife's whole family is great. Work is good. I have a good job where I feel valued. I just recently finished up my doctorate. So I've been able to be successful with that, but I'm doing it more because this is what I want to do. And, I did learn that academically I can be very successful. So that was also kind of a challenge for me to acknowledge that accomplishment, and, where that came from, and that I can value myself and it's okay that I can celebrate that. So I'm finally able to acknowledge my accomplishments, not that, okay, I did this, what's next, to make myself do the right thing. It's like, you know what? I can stop and look back a little bit and say, man, I did a good thing here. And that's good. And I need to acknowledge that.
And it can be enough. There doesn't even have to be a next. It doesn't have to be upped or,
Yeah.
upgraded in some way.
Yeah. And I promised my wife that I'm not going back to school ever again. Because I do keep trying to be that thing, because not only do I want to do well and be good at my job, but there's been a nature of that, okay, well, not only am I going to be a nurse, I need to be the best nurse.
Sure.
And now I'm a nurse practitioner. Now I need to be the best one. It doesn't matter what letters you have, because I'm finally able to acknowledge that I can do well and be successful without the outside thing. So I value my career. I think I've gotten to a place where I have a good job that not just can help me support my family, but that I can be appreciated at and valued at. I could go other places and make more money. There's always jobs where I can make more money. I absolutely could take another job in town and make more money. But this offers me a good work-life balance. And I have good people I work with. So I do appreciate the people I work with because they value me for me, not just for what I can do for them. And that's something that's kind of foreign to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I really value that. I greatly appreciate the friendships I'm starting to develop. I was starting to do things a little more socially with people and do things that I care about, that I think are interesting. I don't care what other people think about them. And I can talk to people about these things I'm doing and that I find interest in. And if they think it's interesting, cool, we'll talk about it. If they don't think it's interesting, it doesn't mean that I'm bad. It doesn't mean that I'm doing something wrong and that I have to hide that. Now, I'm not going to go off for hours talking to them about it because they don't care.
Sure.
But I can talk about it with people, that these things I do that are kind of niche things that I like, that I'm finding I like, that help me define who I am to myself. And I can tell them that and not be worried about what they think about it. That's been really hard. And a lot of that's the reason I haven't really been able to figure out who I am, because I haven't wanted to approach that. Because I've been afraid of, I've been afraid of looking like I'm stupid or not good enough, or wasteful is a big thing. I always grew up having to be productive. What are you doing? Is what you're doing productive? What is this going to get you? Well, no, I can do stuff that doesn't matter now.
Stuff that doesn't matter is
because
still productive in other ways anyway.
it is, because it makes me happy.
Yeah, that's a pretty good product.
Yeah.
Happiness.
I've never been able to accept before that it's okay to do something just because it makes me happy. And it's okay to demand time for myself. It's okay for me to go to my wife and say, hey, I want to do this thing because it's going to make me happy to do that. And she fully supports it. But I would never do that before. I would never do anything just to be happy, but I didn't have anything that really made me happy. That was just for me. I love my wife, and she's been the biggest driver in all of this. If I had never met her, I would probably be dead by now. I can almost guarantee that I would have been dead years ago. Whether by my hand or would have drank myself to death. She has been the motivator for everything I've done to make these changes, to go back to school, and it was all because of her, because I didn't want to lose her, because our relationship wasn't that great. I mean, we were fine, but we weren't really happy. We could have done a lot more, and I wasn't very good. It wasn't anything she did. She didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't emotionally available, and I wasn't willing to do this stuff, and and I felt so badly about myself. So really, she is the driving force. I
Well,
found
sometimes it takes
somebody.
an outside driving force at first because you don't care about yourself and you were taught
No,
not to. But over time, it's very cool that then that can be you have found yourself and happiness for your own sake.
yeah, she's been the
Because
big thing
she's
that's
there.
pushed me, because I didn't care enough about myself. I didn't care enough about myself to take care of myself, but I cared enough about her. I cared enough about the thought, just even the thought, and she never threatened to leave or
Sure.
anything like that. She never did anything like that. But I felt that I could see where I could see where it was going, that I wasn't good enough because I didn't take care of myself, and I was so miserable. Not out of anything she did. She did everything fine, but I didn't value myself enough. And now that gave me the motivation to try and to put myself out there, because I didn't want to take a chance of losing her. If it had been just for me, I probably wouldn't have done it. I would just kept doing the same thing and drank myself to death. But but I found her, and just, I mean, from the day I met her, it was just, it was right there. There's something about her that made me want to do more. So even though it took me a long time to get myself to that point, but there was a motivation about her. And she might listen to this. I don't want to get a big head, but she's pretty great. And we've had our struggle. We both have our own personal things we're dealing with. But I have never been able to be there for her because I would never approach myself. So that's really been very, very helpful. And it's made me feel like I can actually be present for her for what she might need. And maybe I'll do it wrong and screw it up, but that's okay. I can still try.
Well,
But yeah, she's fantastic. My daughter has been, of course, a huge motivator to try and better myself, because I want to be a good role model for her. I want her to understand that whatever she likes is okay. I don't want her to grow up with that mentality I did. And I'm proud of the fact that I'm breaking this generational thing. Yes, this is the rich spiritual heritage that I inherited from my family. No, man, it's a generational curse. And I'm breaking that.
October 31st, 2003, it was early then. I'm getting ready when a couple family friends come round to see me round 7:30 and to Meridian. But at my home this early in the morning, I didn't know what, but something was wrong. It's when I found out my father was gone. It's when I found out my father was gone. It was strange, my whole world had just changed, but everything else just stayed the same. I was looking for someone that I could blame for the way that I felt, cause I felt no pain, but I felt ashamed, cause I felt the strain of a relationship that I failed to maintain, cause I wasn't equipped, even though the same blood's in my veins and we bear the same name. Well, imagine how it is if you were a kid, and no matter what it is, you think it's something that you did, and the end result must have been your fault. So you bottle it up and just swallow it down and convince yourself you deserve it somehow. As you get more mad, you get more sad, and you cry till you think there's no more tears to be had, and you aim all your anger at a stranger named Dad.
My dad wasn't good and my dad wasn't bad. My dad was just my dad and I was just a lad. Could have been better, yeah, could have been worse. Sometimes you do your best and your best still hurts. My dad wasn't good and my dad wasn't bad. My dad was just my dad and I was just a lad. Could have been better, yeah, could have been worse. Sometimes you do your best and your best still hurts.
I'm not trying to bash him, I try to have compassion, but I'm remembering living in that action back then. Back when bad shit was happening, my dad then had been acting like a madman. I acted like I hated him, but I really only hated when took his anger out on my little brothers. Back again, I wish he'd go away and never come back again. But what I really meant by never come back again, I never meant never, I never meant forever. I meant that he'd come back, but after he was better, and endeavored in the effort to tether what's been severed. When the storm's been weathered, bring us all back together, and we'll never leave each other like birds of a feather. Come one thing or another, we're together through whatever, and we never could be better, cause we're better than ever. Better late than never, better in our mind to be kind than it is to be clever, cause we haven't got forever, even half of forever, even half of a half. All we ever have is what we have in one another. All we ever have is what we have in one another.
My dad wasn't good and my dad wasn't bad. My dad was just my dad and I was just a lad. Could have been better, yeah, could have been worse. Sometimes you do your best and your best still hurts.
He was never gonna be who I needed him to be, and there were parts of him I was afraid to see. I was also afraid to see the same parts of me, so I came to a place unafraid to embrace animosity as a commodity. But honestly, it was costing me a whole lot more than it ought to be. I thought probably it's how it's gotta be, cause it's not like I can lobotomy and cut out of me only the parts of him I don't wanna see. So often we only wanna see the parts we need ostensibly, sometimes right away, but often later on we barely have time to realize what we've gotten, and it's gone more often than not. Happened sooner than we thought, or at least in my case it was sooner than I hoped. So my dad had a side to him, the kind of side you don't show. Folks though don't know the kind of thing that don't show, and most folks won't go against what they hold so close to their own soul, closer than a stone's throw, close to their own home. They won't know the unknown if they don't grow their own, don't beyond what they're shown. So the old molds won't hold when the rubber meets the road, so hold to the toll road and believe it when you're told so.
My dad wasn't good and my dad wasn't bad. My dad was just my dad and I was just a lad. Could have been better, yeah, could have been worse. Sometimes you do your best and your best still hurts. My dad wasn't good and my dad wasn't bad. My dad was just my dad and I was just a lad. Could have been better, yeah, could have been worse. Sometimes you do your best and your best still hurts.
If you want to tell your story on the podcast, buy merch, or get more information, go to shunnedpodcast.com.